CTE is often found in the brains of deceased athletes, military veterans, and others with a history of repetitive brain trauma. Hundreds have donated their brains to the VA Boston University Concussion Legacy Foundation Brain Bank.
This is a former NFL player who died in his early 70s, and this is a veteran who also died in his early 70s.
Dr. Ann McKee dissects these brains.
The hippocampus and the mammillary bodies are very important for memory. I can see that they're slightly affected.
McKee recently dissected the brain of former New England Patriots player Aaron Hernandez, who was convicted of murder and later committed suicide.
You'll see right away that the brain is showing signs of shrinkage. You can see the crevices in the brain that you can't see in the normal.
McKee says Hernandez's severe case of CTE impacted his decision-making, depression, and ability to control rage and aggression. Right now, she thinks we're underestimating how many people have CTE.
We were able to distinguish between CTE and controls and CTE and Alzheimer's disease. The next question is, can we do this in the blood, and can we do this in living people? And we aren't there yet with those answers.
But the need for a diagnosis in the living is motivating companies such as Quanterix in Lexington, Massachusetts, to work faster on technology that could diagnose concussions and CTE in as few as 30 minutes. Kevin Rosovsky is the CEO.
It's like a high-powered microscope. And so by doing that, we can see little biomarkers that you couldn't see before in the blood.
Quanterix received a grant from the NFL and just went public. Since then, its stock is up more than 40%. The company sells a machine called Simoa for $175,000 to other biotechs, hospitals, and researchers.
And for the first time in history, we're able to see brain health in blood, and that's a major breakthrough, and that's leading to less invasive testing, and we've already been able to see evidence of concussions, and there's the beginning evidence of being able to see the accumulated effect of concussions.
Quanterix is also trying to detect Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. Rosovsky says he thinks diagnosing concussions will be easier than diagnosing CTE.
Diagnosing CT in the living probably is a couple years away. We're real excited to see the progress, but reducing some of that work into actual tests in a laboratory takes time. There's regulatory approvals, there's a lot of red tape that you have to go through.
Also in this race to diagnose CTE in the blood are Athlon Medical and Exosome Sciences. And New York's Mount Sinai Hospital is scanning for the disease in the living. But it's just one step in a series of questions for those with serious head trauma. There's still no cure for CTE.
Even if we had a great idea for a treatment, there's no way to test whether it's effective or not. So that's the enormous advance that we'll get if we can develop a biomarker for this disease.
In Boston, Ann Mostu, Bloomberg News.
Wine is a $300 billion global industry where one person's opinion can make fortunes or break them. That's because of this man, Robert Parker, and his newsletter, The Wine Advocate. For 3 decades, he dominated as the world's most influential wine critic. Now Parker's protege is building an empire of his own. Antonio Galloni runs Venice.
Antonio, tell me, what are you trying to build at Venice?
Well, at Venice, we started with the idea in 2013 of building a world-class platform. We have a database of about 250,000 professionally written reviews. On Delectable, we have 7 million user reviews. Through Delectable, we also have a partnership with Whole Foods and several other partnerships that we can't announce just yet. And when you put that all together, what we have is something that no other company in our space can even come close to.
Do you think of yourself as the next Parker?
Not at all.
Why?
Because Steve Jobs said you can't live your life trying to be somebody else. So he's one of my biggest influences, and I've never wanted to be a replica of somebody else because a replica is never as good as the original. Bob is a genius, fantastic, one of a kind. We're going to be something completely different, and I have no desire to be some version of somebody else.
Different in what way?
Every decision that I've made at this company is completely anathemic to what Bob did with his company. I want our writers to be partners. All of my senior people are locked into the company. They all have equity or they have a path to equity based on business results. That's something that we never had at Parker. Our benefits are world-class, and everything that we've done at Venice is completely different from that model. When Steve Tanzer, who is the most experienced active wine critic in America, wants to work with us, that says something. When Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's the best cartographer of vineyards, wants to work with us, that says something. When Neil Martin, who's a superstar wine critic with enormous experience in Bordeaux and Burgundy and the former lead critic at The Advocate, wants to come and be part of our team, that says something.
You make it sound like the Wine Advocate was a disaster as a company and a miserable experience as an employee.
No, it was great because I got to work with Bob Parker when he was at his prime, and Bob was like a second father to me, and we talked on the phone all the time, and he gave me great advice.
Can anyone's palate dominate the wine criticism business the way Parker's did? And should anyone's palate dominate it the way his did?
I just think the world is very different today. It's just a totally different world. It's probably not healthy to have a single person dominating the world.
It's not even wine criticism, it's the wine industry.
Yeah, that's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. But I think that there's just such an opportunity right now with social media and technology to reach such a massive number of people that I think it's possible that 1 or 2 people will actually have more influence than Bob Parker did. Because they will, again, this goes back to your first question, not trying to be a version of somebody else. You see this in sports all the time. It's like, oh, well, nobody will ever beat this record. And then somebody comes along, it's like tennis, Pete Sampras. Nobody's ever going to win as many Grand Slams. Now you have 2 guys who are ahead of that and 1 knocking on the door. And so I think a lot like that.
You're a former investment banker. How does that inform and influence what you're doing and what you've done?
My generation has had to deal with a lot more challenges. That's why I think we're actually much better poised for the future. My first job in finance, the first thing that happened was long-term capital, 1998. Then the tech bubble melted down. Then there was a mutual fund trading scandal. That was all like within about 5 or 6 years. And these are the things that I had to deal with as a young executive. My peers who were 20 years older didn't know how to manage in crisis. They'd only seen Black Monday. They'd just been in a big bull market. It's very different. So I'm very lucky. People of my generation or a little bit younger have actually had to deal with a lot more crises. I think that's actually good for learning how to cope with challenges in business.
From the outside, it kind of looks like you're trying to demolish the house that Parker built, right? You left the Wine Advocate.
Yeah.
You merged with one of his chief rivals.
Yeah.
And you just hired his successor, Neil Martin. So are you?
I think what that says is that all the best people want to work at our company. And that's really what we strive to create starting in 2013. We wanted to create a world-class company that would attract the best-in-class talent, and not just on the content side, on the technology side, on the digital side. Our office, and at every level, what we're trying to, we only hire superstars, and we're looking for those superstars.
In the world of professional wrestling, there's something called a swerve.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW.
Some examples. These tag team partners are called babyfaces, or the good guys. Then one of them swerves when he super kicks his tag team partner in the head, quickly assuming the role of the bad guy, or what the wrestling world calls the heel.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was!
Or a match is almost lost when, what's that? The superstar wrestler appears out of nowhere sprinting down the aisle to save the match.
That's the Warriors music! That's the Ultimate Warrior!
That's a swerve. So it should go as no surprise that World Wrestling Entertainment, known as the WWE, the most popular brand of sports entertainment in the world, is prepared for any swerves that come their way. So here's the story of how the WWE learned to see the swerve coming. So I spoke to Bloomberg reporters Felix Gillette
I'm a writer for Bloomberg News for the global business team.
and Kim Basine
And I'm the U.S. luxury reporter at Bloomberg.
to find out exactly how the WWE is positioning itself for an all-out global invasion, which starts with a massive change to their lucrative pay-per-view model.
WWE basically pioneered the pay-per-view model on cable. I remember as a kid when the pay-per-view events came up, all of our friends would scramble around and try and get one of the parents to pay for it.
But in 2014, they took a huge risk.
They saw a little bit sooner than some of the other entertainment brands that where this whole thing was moving was away from cable and satellite television and towards on-demand streaming video apps. They made this risky decision, in essence cannibalizing that pay-per-view model, which they had essentially built.
And after some early turbulence, it's working. Roughly 1.5 million people are paying $9.99 a month for the WWE app, making it the 5th most popular streaming OTT service. This adapt-or-die approach is in the WWE's DNA. Over the past 30 years, the company always seems to think 2 steps ahead. In the early 90s,
WWE was at its most threatened when Ted Turner took them on with WCW.
which stands for World Championship Wrestling, and back then, the WCW was winning the ratings war. So in order to compete with them,
WWE had changed its product from a family-friendly kind of cartoonish style to this really raw. That's why they called their show Raw. It was this raw style of wrestling.
with violent, outrageous, reality-inspired plot lines and aggressive personas.
From a 16-foot ladder!
And they won that fight against Ted Turner. And they bought WCW.
The early 2000s ushered in an era of testosterone-driven programming aimed at the red-blooded American male.
Bra and panties matches, and people smash each other over their head with like barbed wire bats and things like that.
Until 2015, when WWE fans started a hashtag #GiveDivas a Chance. Since then, WWE has hired 40 more female wrestlers, and that growing cast of female characters was part of a much larger plan.
They started to try to appeal to a broader set of people.
Let's attract more female fans. And after we've attracted more female fans, let's attract more international fans. They're broadening their base, and they're doing that in large part to make it more advertising friendly.
And not just friendly to advertisers.
They're trying to build up their fan base in China. They're trying to build up their fan base in Europe. They, already have a pretty good fan base in India.
India is a place where they already have an established wrestling culture.
Because of the gigantic Indian wrestler, the Great Khali. But there's still a lot of work to do. While the WWE set a revenue record in 2017, only 30% of it is coming from an overseas audience. And there's one person whose responsibility is to grow that number.
The buck eventually stops at Vince McMahon, no matter what's happening within WWE.
Yeah, he's a very controlling guy, and it's a very, very, very tightly scripted company.
And that goes all the way down the board to the big stars' entrance music. And their outfits and things like that.
So with a CEO like McMahon always planning 2 moves ahead and an aggressive push into multiple international markets, a big issue is money.
It's hard to do all those things simultaneously without committing a huge amount of capital to it.
And that's where the WWE becomes an attractive company for buyers.
Potentially, one thing that could happen with WWE is they could benefit by being acquired by a bigger technology or telecom company, an Amazon or Facebook or a 21st Century Fox.
So with a market cap of $2.8 billion, the advantage of owning 100% of their own content, and a rapid consolidation spreading throughout the entertainment industry, it looks like the WWE is well positioned, even if there are swerves ahead.
Dara, thank you very much for coming here. I've always been relieved ever since you were appointed, because at least until your appointment, I seem to have the most unpronounceable name. But now we will keep it as Dara and John. This conference is called The Year Ahead, but in your case, you are close to 6 months into the job. And I wondered what you saw in terms of the year ahead at Uber as your biggest challenge. What's the thing that you think about most when it comes to 2018?
We definitely have our share of challenges at Uber. And for me, where I want to get Uber to the year ahead is a year of normalcy. 2017 was, I think, will go down as one of the most difficult years for any company out there. And I have to give credit to the Uber team and the employees there. It is a group of true believers who believe in our mission, who believe in mobility as a service being available to consumers everywhere at a reasonable cost. And what my job in 2018 is to get rid of the distractions and get the company back to business, get the company back to normalcy. There's a lot that we've done in the past 6 months as far as bringing in new investors, driving a new culture and norms where doing the right thing, period, comes first. bring in a new management team, et cetera. There's a lot that we've got done. But this is a company that knows how to execute. This is a service. Mobility as a service is something that's universal, that's needed in the world. And I just want to get back to doing business.
It's interesting. You said true believers. Yeah. Normally, true believers are the last possible people where you're able to change a culture. Can you explain a bit about that?
Well, I think that they understand that mobility is a service, bringing the cost of transportation down, making transportation services available to anyone and everyone on a local basis, and partnering with cities to be a solution to traffic, to pollution, etc. That is a mission that they all believe in. And I think that they, having seen what happened in 2017, to some extent the crisis, the enormous crisis that the company has gone through, is a benefit because everybody at the company knows now that we need to change, that we need to break with the past as far as the way the company was run. We need to go from growth at any cost to responsible growth and growth in partnership with other players out there. That's clear, but now I've got to kind of get the company down to the normalcy of execution, of building great technology, and I think we're going to get there. It's still some tough sledding early on, but I absolutely think we're going to get there.
When you talk about execution, is profits one of the things you want to get? I think you lost $4 billion last year.
Well,
peanuts by the standards of
profits would help. So at some point we absolutely have to become profitable, and that's part of the plan.
Do you have a kind of goal for that? Do you think you should be profitable by 2022 or by 2020?
I think that we'll be profitable before 2022. This is the business itself.
Do you want to come back a bit closer in 2020?
Yeah, listen, it's not going to, I don't want to name a specific year, but this is a business that the core business, the ride-sharing business, can be profitable within 3 years. We will continue to make very aggressive investments in building out autonomy because we think that's a terrific opportunity for building out new technologies such as Uber Elevate, where near-term profitability is not a goal, but long-term growth is. So we will look to balance near-term profitability, but as a company, we will always be a company that makes big, bold bets and takes big risks.
To what extent, though, do you think that drive to become profitable fights against a little bit of this culture change if you want to make... You talked about making money, but not at all costs. Do those two things...
Well, I don't think that profitability and culture are their issue. It's the company in the past was willing to make trade-offs as it related to how it did business. And I think was guilty of hubris, was guilty of thinking that they knew better than others. And I think that what we know now clearly is that breakneck growth can hide cultural issues, that there are no excuses for not doing the right thing, and that you do have to make trade-offs. And as a management team, we're specifically talking about those trade-offs that you have to make. We have to be a little more patient sometimes because working with governments, regulators, etc., sometimes takes longer, but in the end, you build a more lasting business. And so maybe what we went through was necessary, but we're here, we can control our actions from this moment onwards, and I think everyone at Uber from this moment onwards wants to build a great company, not only in terms of growth, but in terms of the kind of company anyone would want to work at.
Can I ask you one thing which you have got, a sort of hangover from last year, which is all the regulatory problems, and particularly all the cases against you. I think there are 6 criminal probes or whatever going on.
The lawyers are lining up outside the door.
Which one do you sort of think? Which one do you fear most? I suppose. Out of different things.
Listen, I think that all of them are serious issues, and my response is that we're going to be transparent and we're going to take responsibility for our actions in the past. I do think that there are certain circumstances where there was smoke but no fire. And I think as a company, we have to defend ourselves and work within kind of the appropriate frameworks. And my goal is just to get beyond this stuff.
Some of these things like pricing policies, surely they go right to the heart of what Uber is.
Yeah, I think they do, but I think that there's a way of being smart but transparent at the same time, and that's where we've got to take the company.
Take me through governments. When you talk to governments privately, do they talk any differently than they do publicly?
Governments?
Yes, governments.
I think that they are honestly a bit relieved with how we are engaging with them, because I think that the engagement is now real. I think they feel like we're out there, we're genuine because we've learned our lessons of the past. And I do think that we can take, for example, the data that we have in terms of traffic and in terms of movement of our drivers and riders, and we can use that data to partner up with cities in order to solve congestion issues, because congestion doesn't help anyone. It wastes enormous amounts of time for consumers. It hurts the environment. And I think that we are aligned with cities, for example, to partner with them in a fundamental way to solve these problems. And I do think that when these are conversations that a number of regulators and cities have wanted to have with us for many years, and I think we are really engaging with them at a depth that I think is going to create a real win-win going forward.
Do you think you were too confrontational on this before?
Yeah, I do. I think that the company was pushing growth. And listen, any innovator, to some extent, the innovation is about questioning past kind of present practices. It's about breaking things, the Facebook breaking things. We just went a step and a half too far. And what I want to keep, hopefully, is the best of both worlds, which is the spirit of innovation, the spirit of can-do, etc., but the responsibility of partnership. We don't know better than you. We're actually going to work with you, of actually having dialogue and respect for our city partners, for regulators, and then continuing to take risks and continuing to do daring things. And I think we can accomplish that.
Imagine this audience here is a collection of mayors or a collection of city officials, and you want to depict, this is the Year Ahead conference, depict what the years ahead in this thing are going to be like. How far is driverless cars going to go? You talked just a few days ago about the idea there being flying cars in 10 years' time. Can you just give a description of what you think transport is going to look like?
Well, I think that we think there are three keys to transport and where the industry is going: autonomous, electric, and shared. And I think all three are necessary in order to get to the next level of city planning, etc. There are many cities where up to a fifth of the space taken in these cities is taken by parking and storing these cars. And so I do think that you need autonomous, you need electric, and you need shared. And I do think it's going to take some time. True autonomy for every single use case is some ways away. What we bring to bear is our developing autonomy, and we will have autonomous cars on the road, I believe, within the next 18 months, not as a kind of a test case, but as a real case out there. And over a period of time, we're going to bring autonomous transportation and feather it in with the non-autonomous transportation with drivers.
What does feathering in mean?
Feathering in means
to a layman like me.
Crashing. Yeah, feathering in means if you're, for example, in Phoenix, and you make a request to go from A to B, which is what you do with Uber. There will be 95% of cases where we may not have everything mapped perfectly, where the weather may not be the right weather, or there may be an accident on the road, or you may not have 2 or 3 ways of getting from A to B, where you may say, you know what, that's not an autonomous use case. We're going to send a driver to pick that person up. For 5% of cases, everything is going to fall into place. And we will send an autonomous car, the user will be able to pick, do you want, this autonomous car, yes or no, and we'll be able to service that A for B. That 5% is going to go to 10 and 15 and 20 as our computers and our algorithms learn more and more about what it takes to drive in a city in a real life situation. And every minute of every day, that driver, that computer is going to get better and know Phoenix better and better and better. And in 5 years, we'll have the perfect driver in Phoenix. We will have to retrain that driver in every single city. We're going to have to build out 3D maps of these cities. And it will take time, but over a period of time, you essentially have a driver who becomes the perfect driver. It'll take 10 to 15 years, but that's the feathering in that I'm talking about.
Will a child born today, will they ever need to learn how to drive?
A child born today? No. I don't think so.
So within sort of 20 years from now, we will...
I don't think so. Listen, I hear some groans.
And also,
listen, I heard a couple of groans. 1.3 million people die from car crashes every year. 1.3 million people die from car crashes every year. That doesn't count an estimated 20 to 50 million people that are injured. This is actually a public safety issue. If you look at cars, 96% of cars, 96% of time, cars are sitting there not being used. It's a huge amount of pollution that's caused by these cars being in the road, and a huge amount of wasted time. So the safety is there. Electrification is absolutely key, and sharing these platforms is going to allow us to be much safer and also put our assets where they add value.
It's quite interesting because when you first came in, I remember you sounding somewhat more skeptical about self-driving cars. You've been converted. Is that a?
The choir has spoken and I'm listening. It's pretty exciting technology out there. But again, it will be a hybrid technology for some period of time.
What about flying cars? That came as a slight surprise.
Yes, that's a great project that we're working on. It's called Uber Elevate. And it is actually about battery technology.
It would have helped a lot of people here.
I know. I wish that I was available. We'll launch it here if we can. But battery technology is allowing us to have multiple rotors on planes, or helicopters, if you want to call them that. These rotors that are much smaller will be much quieter than helicopters are. Much quieter, much safer. If you add sharing into the equation, you can actually get the economics of going from A to B. We think within 5 to 7 years to a place where normal people would think about taking these flying cars. That'll be the beginning, and then it's about scaling. And we're working with a number of partners right now.
Do you think the regulation on flying cars, I've heard some proponents of it argue that it might be easier than it has been on driverless cars, because driverless cars you have to deal with existing roads, existing everything. Flying cars, essentially you're going into unconquered space.
I think that mayors that are forward-thinking understand that traffic and pollution are a real issue. And I think flying cars can be a significant solution to traffic issues in cities. And these cars, to start with, they're going to be very specific. They'll be kind of highways in the air. There'll be very specific routes that these flying cars go on. They're not going to be able to take you to your backyard and land in your backyard. There'll be these skyports. So there'll be very specific routes that you go on. And I think if you build a regulatory framework that has that kind of structure around it, I think you get to a better solve.
Can I drag you back somewhat reluctantly back to the real world? But you have Rajiv Misra, who came in with you from SoftBank.
Yes.
He's going to become a director. Last week he said that Uber should focus on repairing its market share in the US and on key European markets rather than going going to new ones. Do you agree with that? Is that the way you look at Uber?
I think one of the fundamental strengths of Uber is the global scope that we have.
You had that motto, everywhere. What's it? Everywhere for everyone.
Yeah, everywhere for everyone.
You want to make it some places for some people?
No, we like the everywhere for everyone. It's much sexier than some places for some people. That's just not interesting. I do think seriously though the global scope that our company brings is important. Our being able to build technology that we can amortize essentially everywhere in the world is hard, but it is part of the fundamental value that we introduce. So I would look at Uber very much as a global brand. That said, we're going to look at all opportunities, but at this point we are leaning forward, and 2018 for us is going to be very much a lean forward year for the company.
But without, I'm not trying to create new boardroom tension at Uber, but that would appear that SoftBank is keener on a more limited idea, whilst you're keener on everywhere for everyone.
Well, listen, SoftBank is a very important shareholder. They're our largest shareholder, and many of our shareholders have opinions over what's the right thing to do. Ultimately, the governance of the company is going to be at the board, and we'll have those discussions at the board, and we'll set our long-term strategy, and then execute on it.
One of the things which Uber played, perhaps not very fortunately, a role in was the whole sexual harassment questions and everything to do with that. I suppose one very obvious question, do you think that you have solved that part of the culture? But secondly, do you think that is, this time, this is a real revolution and it's going to stick?
I think that what was happening at Uber was serious, and I think that while what Uber went through was difficult, I think the Susan Fowler blog was probably one of the best things that happened for Uber, and it certainly started a movement that's an incredibly important movement of the company. I'd be reticent to say that it's solved, but it's not an endemic issue within the culture of the company, and I think the company has learned, and I think the company took very harsh and appropriate steps to make sure that that kind of behavior is absolutely clear, that kind of behavior is not accepted in any way, shape, or form of the company, regardless of where you are, regardless of if you're a great performer or not. So I think we're at the right place for Uber as a company, but I think in general we're not where we need to be in terms of women in senior positions, making sure that we're welcoming of women in technology, and we help women really build their careers within our company. There's a great kind of bottoms-up energy there, but we're not where we need to be, and we have a lot of work ahead of us.
On the issue of you talked about the top performers. Is that looking back, and also I suppose looking forward for many of the people in this room, because there are a lot of people's businesses which have been affected by this. If you had to give lessons to other people who are now looking at this issue perhaps more seriously than they have done before, is the really bad issue, and I suppose I'm thinking in some ways about the media industry in this, is that giving top performers more room for maneuver or whatever, or more discretion than people thought, is that top performers need to be treated the same as everybody else?
I think they absolutely need to be held accountable. One of the really valuable lessons that I got early in my life was actually through Jack Welch, and he said, you know, it's very tempting to allow top performers to misbehave in any way, but for me, he was talking about being aligned with the CEO. Sometimes you allow top performers. The tendency is, well, let them get away with some kind of behavior that is not the right behavior because they're so good. And what Jack told me very early on is that it's the top performers who are problematic culturally that are the most dangerous, because they have followership within the company, because people look up to them. So he's like the dumb person who is bad culturally. He's not the problem, because everyone says, well, that's a dumb person, so who cares? It's the smart person who has followership. So it is incredibly important for the top performers to actually be held to account more radically than anyone else, because they're the ones who have followership at the company, and they have to set the example. So for me personally, that has absolutely guided how I've managed. Expedia was a company that had, excellent cultural values. And one of the first things we did at Uber was to go out and reset our cultural values, and we call them norms, because to me, it's not just these values that you put on the wall and kind of people stare at it and it's all nice. It's about behavior. And we set out to change behavior at Uber, and I think that the company was thirsting for it. And we are starting on a path, and I believe it's going to be a positive path.
An inevitable question, I hope you won't regard it as a cheap shot, but you talked about smart people who have followers throughout a company. I mean, Travis would seem to be the epitome of that sort of figure. Is that, do you think of him as being in that category of people that Jack Welch was talking about?
I think, listen, Travis was the CEO of the company, and he had incredible followership. And he was held to account. Right? I mean, he's no longer the CEO of the company, and he's a board member. He's a big investor, and so he's absolutely going to play a part on the board. But we've also been very clear as a company that we do have to make a break with the past, with how we behaved as a company, and to some extent with the new CEO being a very different kind of a CEO. So in the end, you have to be held accountable, and I think that Travis was held accountable, and at this point, he's a board member and a constructive one at that.
If you look around the world now, where do you see the next competitors to Uber? You've obviously got Lyft breathing down your neck.
Yes.
Where else do they come from?
Well, I think that as you move into a world of autonomy, the position of the car manufacturers, the position of, for example, Google, who's developing Waymo and Waymo autonomous technology, you're going to get a lot of players interested in this space. And a lot of people think about Uber and ride sharing as a significant enterprise, and it is. But the fact is that we account for less than 1% of miles driven on the road now. When autonomy comes in, that number over the next 10 years is going to be closer, I believe, to 15 to 20%. So, because we're not yet a true alternative to car ownership, and I believe that as you bring autonomous and you bring the price of mobility down and make it available to everybody, everywhere, then we become a real alternative to car ownership, and that really opens up the market for us. But it also opens us up to many more competitors.
Is Google at the forefront of those competitors at the moment?
Google is one of many. I think that they've developed very strong autonomous technology. But what we think, which is exceptional, is having autonomous technology and the network under one roof, which allows us to use autonomous in a very practical way, nearer than you think.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from New York and New Jersey, streaming on YouTube, TGIF. It is Friday, May 29th, 2020. Shortened holiday week, Jason Kelly, but it felt like we packed in a lot, and we have a jam-packed show coming up.
Yeah, was it a short week? It does not feel like that at all. It feels like we did double time, given everything that's been going on, and it was a full circle week. As you pointed out on our planning call, we started talking about Twitter and the president and China, and hello, here we are again. It's sort of a Groundhog Day kind of week, a Groundhog Day kind of period that we're living in right now.
Deja vu all over again, and we're going to be going live to the White House for a news conference with President Trump. We will take you there as soon as it gets going. Let's get you caught up, though, on the trading day. A little bit quieter than we've seen throughout the week. Let's check in with Charlie Pellett. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday indeed, and last trading day of the month. It's on to June. We've got the S&P down 19 right now at 3,010. A drop there of 0.6%. The Dow is down 250, down by 1%. Nasdaq holding on to a gain of 8 points, now higher by 0.1%. Stocks pushing lower, bonds advancing. Investors weighing the biggest drop on record in U.S. consumer spending. We're also awaiting President Trump's latest response in his escalating feud with China. 10-year yield 0.66%, gold up 0.9%, 17.34 the ounce, crude up 21 cents a barrel at 33.93. That's a gain of 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. And as Carol said just a minute ago, we are awaiting some comments from President Trump. He has promised to give an update on China, a little bit of reporting there that there may be some sanctions geared toward the financial sector. This, of course, all about what's going on in Hong Kong. It certainly has had an effect on the markets this week. So let's set the Business Week agenda with a couple markets experts. Vincent Signorella is global macro strategist for Bloomberg, joining us on the phone from White Plains. He contributes, of course, to the macro Squawk desk. You can check that out at Squawk on your launchpad on the Bloomberg terminal. Dave Wilson, also with us, of course, stocks editor for Bloomberg, joining us via remote line from New Jersey. So, Dave, we heard the numbers from Charlie, a mixed trade today. Put this in the context of this week, because it's been, I think this is a technical term, a doozy.
Yeah, I mean, it has been. You know, let's face it, with the S&P 500 getting above 3,000, I suppose the good news is that earlier in the day it dipped below that round number and then managed to bounce back. So it's lower, but not a whole lot lower in relative terms. I mean, what jumps out about today is that you see technology stocks kind of reassert their market leadership. I mean, they're the best performer among the 11 major distributors of the S&P 500. And on the other hand, you've got financial stocks taking the biggest hit with all the back and forth related to Hong Kong. Maybe that's not a surprise. Energy stocks too. And what jumps out there is that we've seen Occidental Petroleum, which has already cut its dividend once this year, do it again. Brought it down actually to 1 cent a share. They had been looking at 11 cents for their next payout. They didn't even get that paid, and it brought it down to a penny a share on a quarterly basis. So it just goes to show you what the oil industry is going through, specifically Occidental with their purchase of Anadarko Petroleum a couple of years ago, and how that has become a real issue in terms of lower energy prices and the debt they took on for that deal, and having to deal with Berkshire Hathaway's Warren Buffett, among other things. Berkshire was a major investor in that transaction. Put it all together, I mean, it's just markets showing some strength, but not enough to move higher.
Yeah, exactly. Vince Signorella, come on in on this conversation. You and I have been messaging back and forth all week, really about what's going on with China. And here we are. We started the week this way, and we're waiting for the president to make some comments. How are you seeing it? What are some of the conversations you're having on the blog?
Well, a lot of folks I've been talking to are wondering if this is going to be as bad as the markets have sort of made it seem over the last 24 hours. The feeling is the longer the president takes to respond, and he could have responded immediately after the House passed, the more that the response is going to be muted and measured, I should say, and that it's not going to be this all-out sort of heavy, hard sanction situation that markets are worried about. We've had a situation where we've seen China react to what the United States does, and not the other way around. So this, if we actually respond with heavy sanctions, I mean, the Hong Kong situation and such was a response for the House and Senate passing bills. So if we were to now respond to that, it opens up the door for China to most certainly respond to us. And the weight on the market right now is, does the White House really want to take on a heavy-handed war with China months ahead of an election and months ahead of every member of the House coming up for election?
Well, you know what was interesting too, though, Vince? I was hearing a conversation earlier, and I think it was Ian Brenner, and just saying that no matter who was in the White House, they would have had to respond to the actions on Hong Kong. That this was certainly something any White House would have had to respond to, but it does look like it's going above and beyond that.
Yeah, it has that feel to it. It had that feel yesterday. It just doesn't feel as much today. If I were advising the president, I would say give it a measured response, because you don't want to force their hand, make them react to Hong Kong, but rather respond to any heavy-handed action in Hong Kong. And that would give the U.S. and the rest of the world the upper hand. You don't want to make the situation look like they forced China into doing something in Hong Kong and give them an excuse to say, we only did this in response to your pushing us up against the wall. Now, obviously, I'm not advising the president, so I can't exactly tell you what he's going to say in a few minutes.
You sure you don't want to share something with us, Vince?
Yeah.
Maybe a little side job here?
Some DMs going back and forth between you. He's been on Twitter, I think it's fair to say, so you could just DM him.
I'll give you one little bit of optimism, though, in the data this morning that very few people seem to be talking about. We talk about the big drop in spending, which we kind of had a feel was coming. This big boost in personal income, which, and I'm going to give you round numbers, we had something like an $800 billion drop in personal income from working, basically. But we had almost a $2.9 trillion stimulus plan. And the anecdotal evidence is that people who were laid off, not obviously every individual, but as a whole, have made more money and have more income right now than they did before, as we saw the savings rate jump. So going forward over the next 2 months, and this may show up in May's numbers as well, we may see this boost to the economy that everybody's been talking about coming down into the third quarter.
Yeah, that's interesting, and mirrors something that we heard from Margaret King yesterday about, people, the spending is coming back, and people are also taking care of some of their debt at this hour.
Want to bring you one headline just crossing the Bloomberg. It's an important one and relevant to what we may be about to hear from the president. The president not planning to quit the Phase 1 China deal. This is according to, as Carol Master would say, a person in the know. Bloomberg reporting that, and that popping nicely on the Bloomberg right now. Clearly, everyone wants to know what happens next with China. Dave Wilson, give us a quick tease for your chart and stock of the day.
Well, as far as the chart goes, it's all about a comparison between growth and value stocks, which suggests growth isn't all that expensive by historical standards. And as far as the stock of the day goes, think housewares.
That's a nice tease. That's a nice tease. I do wonder, I just want to mention, you mentioned that Phase 1 trade deal. Let's remember, or let's remind everybody that what that was is the U.S. cutting some U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods, and then China pledging to buy more of American farm energy and manufacturing goods. And also addressing some of the U.S. concerns about IP, intellectual property practices. So that's Phase 1 that's out there.
Right, and it has not gone according to plan by most estimates. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much, Vince Signorella and Dave Wilson. Dave, we'll check in with you later in the show.
All right, let's get to the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day. It's one number that tells us a lot. Today's number is over 0. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe it is. We'll
so
see.
Costco is bringing back free samples. The CFO telling analysts yesterday on an earnings call that the chain's food sampling stations will begin returning in some capacity in June.
Yeah, the company will start a slow rollout of some form of sampling, but it won't be stuff on open trays, grabbing it with your fingers, and some will be eliminated. Galanti said that the chain's warehouses are still enforcing social distancing and sanitizing, and noted that many food courts have been closed or mitigated during the majority of the quarter, so free samples still available.
Okay. God, I was getting a little worried.
Why would you go to Costco with it?
All right, let's get a check on World and National News headlines. For that, let's check in with Bob Moon. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Carol. A reminder that we're awaiting the President's news conference. You'll hear it live here on Bloomberg Radio. A vow today from Minnesota's governor that tonight will not be like the last 2 nights of violence around Minneapolis. This after the arrest of the police officer seen on video kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, a handcuffed black man who died, pleading that he could not breathe. At this point, it's unclear what charges the officer may be facing. Minnesota Governor Tom Walz is calling on hundreds of members of the Minnesota National Guard, meantime, to assist in weeding out the peaceful protesters from the violent ones.
The farthest thing from people's on their minds as they're burning down a family-owned store at 3 a.m. on Lake Street was George Floyd. And that's what we've got to get at.
The governor admits to what he calls an abject failure over the last 2 days. He says tonight there will be no lack of leadership. President Trump added fuel to racial fires today as he threatened to take action to bring the city of Minneapolis under control. calling violent protesters thugs and reviving a civil rights era phrase fraught with racist overtones. He said flatly, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Trump's tweet was quickly flagged by Twitter as violating rules against glorifying violence. The White House said the president did not glorify violence. Global News 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. I'm Bob Moon. Carol, Jason.
All right, Bob Moon, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week on this Friday. So, Jason, one of the headlines that caught me this morning and earlier today was Governor Cuomo saying New York City, the last region of the state to remain on lockdown, it could begin to reopen on June 8th. So we are seeing things continuing to move forward. This has cases, virus cases, top 5.8 million, deaths over 360,000. Let's bring back with us Dr. Ian Lustbader. He's Clinical Associate Professor of Medicine at NYU Langone Medical Center, a friend of the show, on the phone from New York City. Dr. Lustbader, nice to have you back with us. How's your week been?
Okay, thanhanks so much. Hope you guys are staying well. Busy week for sure. Seeing a lot of patients who fortunately have been discharged from the hospital with COVID, and we're seeing a number of the sort of sequelae or side effects or people that have been quite ill, some mildly and some more severely with, residual cough, chest pain, abnormal liver function tests. So not everyone gets out completely unscathed, as we've seen.
Right. All right, so reopening.
But wait, why do you let them out then?
Well, if someone is well enough breathing on their own, doesn't need a machine, people are not kept in until they're perfect, because that could take weeks or even months. And it's really not efficient to do that. So as long as someone gets through the kind of acute phase where they're breathing on their own, room air and so forth, able to move around, eat, they may not feel 100%, and they may not feel 100% for a prolonged time. You just can't keep everyone in sort of indefinitely or until there's perfection achieved.
So help us synthesize that, sort of the after effects of this with what is going to be a gradual reopening of New York City, as Carol said, the last region of New York State to open. What are you expecting to happen in the short term, and what advice do you have for New Yorkers?
So I think we're seeing a lot of people anxious about returning. Certainly we don't have that vaccine, which we've talked about in the past. That would certainly be reassuring. We're seeing a number of patients with antibodies that are positive, which certainly would help, but nowhere near the herd immunity of 30, 40, 50%. That would be great. So people, I think, are very concerned, certainly older people or people at risk groups. But I think most of the patients, most people are just happy to get back, want to get back, and I think a little bit of that is play it by ear. There will be some risks. There will be some probable increase in cases, the so-called second wave. Hard to know how big that will be, because certainly in New York we've had a lot of patients who've had COVID, so it's certainly we have a little bit of a heads up or a little bit of a leg up in other areas where at least some of the population has antibodies. But I think if you're older, sicker, have a compromised immune system, COPD, lung issues, heart issues, elderly, probably best to be very safe and be some of the last to return to normal activity.
What's interesting, too, that you bring up antibodies. There's a great story, I think I read, it was in the journal or out of Dow Jones, and just talked about the obscure trade of basically blood, that people are looking for the blood of recovered COVID-19 patients. It's become a hot commodity because everybody wants to look at that blood and learn more about the virus. But that's one of the crucial steps, right, in kind of understanding where we've been, where we're going.
Yeah, there's no question that the blood of patients who have been sick and recovered completely is a hot commodity. Certainly for convalescent plasma trials that are going on in many hospitals where sick patients are being given that convalescent plasma, and we think hopefully will shorten their illness and hopefully save lives. But that blood is also useful for many tests. All these small biotech companies, some of which are not totally regulated, want those blood samples to run as controls because they're developing antibody tests as well, and research labs. So there's sort of a Wild West scramble for the blood of patients who've done well, really to better understand the nature of the disease, what are the nature of the antibodies, and even just for regular lab testing. So we've seen some like blood brokers and sort of the shadier side of biotech occurring. And it's unfortunate because in any crisis, you've got people doing well and doing good things. The patients, many of my patients say, I'm so happy I survived. I'd love to donate blood. And they can at the New York Blood Center, where not only blood donations are taken happily, but also for convalescent plasma. So patients who've survived and done well can have that plasma taken out and used in a variety of studies. But there are also bad people who are trying to extract high prices.
We're speaking with Dr. Ian Lustbader, one of our go-to docs in helping us understand this virus. I do want to bring you one headline that has crossed to Bloomberg. The former officer in Minneapolis who has been implicated in the death of George Floyd, he has been charged with murder and manslaughter. That is according to some local news reports there in Minneapolis. Obviously, that has triggered riots and looting there in Minneapolis. It has drawn national attention in many ways. We'll be bringing you updates throughout the day in our world and national newscast, but I did want to bring you that headline because it is clearly top of mind for many of us.
You know, Ian, one of the other things that we're thinking about when it comes to the virus, there was a story also that just talked about a farm in Tennessee where every single worker has COVID, and just, a reminder, I think it was roughly 200 employees that had been infected. Just a reminder that, this is, obviously we don't want to see anybody get the virus, but it also is something that impacts, our food supply chain. I mean, we're continuing to still see some pretty big outbreaks around the country.
No question, and I think people really seem to fall into the cavalier camp, where a lot of young people feel they're impervious or in a low-risk group and are socializing or running around without masks. And then there's another group that's very concerned and mad if they see people around them. I've seen this even in families where different generations take this more or less seriously, and older parents may be angry at younger people for not being prudent and wearing masks all the time, which is difficult. I mean, it is an adjustment. Not everyone has gotten used to that, but certainly we do need critical infrastructure like food supply and others that are safe. And without a vaccine, all we can really do is social distancing and wear masks. And we need to do more studies to see if some medications, we talked about this last week, obviously some drugs like hydroxychloroquine have pro and con data, but we really need those studies. We have to remember this broke basically in January, so we've had 5 or 6 months. It hasn't been with us for years, and it takes time to get these studies done.
That's a really good point. That it does feel like it's been a long time, but it really hasn't been.
And Ian, I mean, I do want to ask, we've talked a little bit about this before, but we've talked about this with a lot of heads of hospitals, and as we've discussed, you've been on the front lines of this. And I wonder, for you as a doctor, I mean, how does your practice change in the short and midterm coming out of this? And, setting a second wave aside and assuming that we're going to be able to deal with another COVID outbreak medically, but I do wonder, your interactions with patients, your conversations with them, like, how are you thinking about this going forward, just as a practitioner here?
Well, we're seeing patients with N95 masks and face shields, and that certainly is closer. At least patients are now coming back into the office, which is great. Telemedicine has been very, very helpful, and a lot of patients who really are afraid to come in, they shouldn't, because we're checking temperatures for people coming in. So prudent steps are being done to reassure patients that it is safe to come in for screening, testing, colonoscopy in the office, and it's great to have telemedicine. But there's definitely a bit of a barrier. You're seeing patients you're wearing gloves, you're wearing a mask and a face shield, they're wearing a mask. It is, everyone is adapting, and it's certainly good to be in person, but it definitely is it's getting used to, and you have to make extra effort to really get a good diagnosis and reassure people and encourage them that it's okay not only to come in but to do testing, that it's safe to go to a lab to do blood tests. So there are definitely a lot of hurdles, and I think we're going to see that as we try to get people back in along the way. And I think if there is a second wave, which is certainly possible, that will really be a shock to the economy and to people's psyches because people don't like to feel vulnerable.
Yeah, I have to say, I had to go out for a routine test, and I was very impressed with the procedures, and they really thought about the patients coming in and were very careful. I was in another situation in a doctor's office where I felt like it's a little crowded, so it was a little odd. I just want to ask you quickly, you've got Florida, their COVID-19 cases up 2.3% versus a previous 7-day average of 1.3%. Is it just because more people are being tested, or is this possibly early indications of a second wave in your view?
I think it's a combination. I think we're getting a lot more tests and hopefully reliable tests. We talked about those blood brokers. I would stick with national labs that are doing those tests, the antibody tests and the swabs, much more reliable. But I think we probably, especially in Florida, now that once you start getting cases, there tends to be that curve. And I don't think a lot of states have peaked yet. New York has peaked and we know is coming down, and that's why we're returning. But I think many other states, and I think Florida too, may not have seen the peak yet. And this may not be a second wave. This may just be the first wave that is continuing to ripple through in a state that is more spread out than New York. In New York City, you have a lot of exposure in a very dense area. In Florida, I'm just wondering if this may not be just the natural progression.
Right, you mentioned New York, COVID-19 cases up 0.4%. That's in line with the 7-day average, which has been up 0.4%. So, yeah, there's the differences. Ian, thank you so much. Really appreciate, as always, your insight and love that we get to check in with you every week. Dr. Ian Lustbader, have a good weekend. Clinical Associate Professor of Medicine at NYU Langone Medical Center. Dr. Lustbader joining us on the phone right here in New York City.
All right. Well, we are keeping an eye on the markets and clearly the market trying to figure out what the president may say. We will take you to Washington as soon as the president comes to the podium. In the meantime, let's understand what those numbers look like with Charlie Pellet. He's got
thank you very much, and a happy Friday to you both. We've got the Dow, the S&P lower, Nasdaq is higher. Just one headline, just want to repeat that we brought you. President Trump said to be not planning to quit a Phase 1 China deal. This according to a source. Again, the president not planning to quit a Phase 1 China deal. We are awaiting the president's remarks, and yes, we'll have those for you live right here on Bloomberg Radio. Stocks have pared losses, bonds advanced as investors brace for President Trump's latest response in his escalating feud with China. The S&P now down by 6. That's a drop of 0.2%. The Dow is down 136, down 0.5%, while Nasdaq is up 44, up right now by 0.5%. 10-year yield, 0.66%, right now up 7/32. Gold is up 1%, 17.35 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude rallying 2.5% right now, 34.58 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Massar here with you. Sun coming out here in the tri-state area, at least my part of the tri-state area. It's been a little cloudy.
It's been back and forth here, but I have to say I was out before and it was gorgeous.
Yeah, it's really nice. Hopefully a nice weekend ahead. We will be taking you to Washington, where the president is expected to talk about his latest with China. Let's set the stage for that with Jordan Fabian. He is Bloomberg News White House correspondent, joining us on the phone from the nation's capital. All right, Jordan, it's been quite a week when it comes to the president and social media and China. Help us understand what we need to be focused on now ahead of hearing from the president.
Well, I think what we're looking for in this press conference is what exactly is he going to announce in response to this law that China is considering against Hong Kong. We're reporting now that he's looking at targeted sanctions and trade measures in retaliation to that. We'll have to tune in to hear the specifics of what exactly that means and how far he's willing to go to punish Beijing for its moves against Hong Kong.
You know, Jordan, I was hearing earlier another interview on Bloomberg Radio with David Weston where the observation was that any president would be doing this in terms of Hong Kong, that, this just goes above and beyond and certainly would impact our relationship, with Hong Kong. So I do wonder what you're hearing from policy watchers and other folks in and around the Beltway about what the president may do.
First of all, I think what makes this a little notable is the president has been loath to criticize China in the past, thanks to his what he says his relationship is with Chinese President Xi and the Phase 1 trade deal. We're seeing that change now with coronavirus. The president seeking to blame China for the outbreak. But as to what it means, I think people are looking again to see how far he's willing to go. Is he willing to do broad sanctions and financial penalties that would hurt the global economy, that would hurt Hong Kong's economy? Their allies at the White House that don't want him to do those things. They want him to take more targeted measures that would identify individuals who are maybe responsible for this move, but that wouldn't have broad-ranging effects on the economy there and here in the United States, especially as we're facing headwinds due to the virus.
Jordan, what about U.S. allies? Where are they on all of this?
Well, it's interesting. The U.S. and the U.K. and Canada had put out a joint statement yesterday, sort of condemning the moves against Hong Kong. So there is some support the U.S. has here for retaliation. I suppose depending how far they will go. There are also calls to have a meeting at the UN Security Council to handle this issue, but China so far has blocked such a meeting.
And so, help us understand this in the context of everything else that's going on and that you're hearing, Jordan, because I have to imagine that if the president takes questions, he is going to be asked about Minneapolis. He is going to be asked about Twitter. What are you hearing in terms of what the president is saying? He just put out a tweet, I should point out, clarifying his statements over that looting leads to shooting tweet that drew, some rebuke of sorts from Twitter overnight last night. This is part of a larger conversation that has really dominated what we've heard out of Washington this week.
Yes. He's really trying to clean up what he said earlier this morning, which prompted Twitter to slap a warning, basically accusing Trump of inciting violence in Minneapolis. And this is part of a pattern we've seen with this president over the years. Recently he's tried to court black voters ahead of his reelection run, but really in the past he's almost openly endorsed police brutality, and even going back to his years in real estate, talked about reinstating the death penalty for the Central Park Five. So he's going to have a bit of a mess to dig himself out of when he takes the microphone here in a few minutes.
Yeah, and I do wonder, because we have seen certainly the president before, Jordan, when it goes into certain areas or he just doesn't like some of the conversations, he could end it. I don't know what we're hearing about whether or not this is going to be a quick press conference and limited to the president only wanting to talk about China, or again, as Jason mentioned, there's so much going on in our world right now and certainly in our country, whether or not the president is expected to kind of deal with all these issues.
Yeah, as the president likes to say, we'll see what happens, right? He can be unpredictable with how he handles these press conferences, and sometimes when he says press conference, he really just means statement and will make an announcement and leave. So we'll have to see how he handles it. We'll have to see what kind of mood he's in. Certainly, if the tweet he just put out is any indication, he feels a little bit under fire and the need to clean up what he was saying. So it's possible he might take a question on that, but it's also possible he was trying to preempt questions on that subject by putting out the tweet that he just did.
And speaking of tweets and Twitter, what are people saying, Jordan, about this executive order and what it means, and both the politics behind it, as you guys have been discussing, but also sort of the broader implications and the political implications, because there is a sense that this is speaking to a very vocal part of his base, a very effective part of his base that defends him on social media. Help us understand some of the nuances here.
Yeah, this order really seemed to stem from a personal grievance the president had with Twitter. It came right after Twitter had issued not really correction, but added some additional context to his tweet on mail-in voting, saying it contained incorrect information. And a couple days later, he's coming out with this order that he said would curb liability protections for social media companies, including Twitter, if they sort of take down content or alter content in quote-unquote bad faith. The problem with this is, from a policy standpoint, that this definition of good or bad faith is enshrined in law, and we're hearing from civil liberties advocates, from industry groups, saying that this is not legal, that you can't change the law by executive fiat. You have to go through Congress. And so we would expect legal challenges to this rule, and it may never really go into effect. But as you pointed out, this is really a bone to his base that agrees with him that social media companies are censoring conservatives. And so whether or not it ever goes into effect, it could sort of be a jolt of energy to his supporters going into the fall.
I got to say, Jordan, it really does feel like in the last week or so that President Trump has shifted dramatically from virus to I'm back, in the race and the reelection. And I'm curious what you're hearing about what's going on inside the White House in terms of strategizing, because it really does feel like that's the focus right now.
Certainly, for a couple of weeks now, all of the energy has shifted toward reopening and as you said, the campaign. And I will point out that while the schedules we get from the White House indicate that the coronavirus task force is still meeting, you don't really see people like Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci in public at the White House frequently anymore talking about what's going on, even though we've crossed the 1,000 death threshold, that testing and contact tracing are such crucial issues as states and cities begin to open. We're not hearing from those medical professionals. We're hearing from the president. We're hearing from the White House press secretary, who was his former campaign spokesman, who often uses those briefings to amplify the president's campaign message. So the message and the focus here at the White House has certainly shifted over the past couple of weeks.
All right. Well, we know it will be interesting to certainly hear what he says next. I mean, the Biden camp too. I mean, what Democrats are obviously rallying around this to some extent. The Twitter side of things, the China side of things. As you talk to your politically minded colleagues, folks who are covering the campaign closely, what intel are you gathering there, Jordan?
Well, first of all, Biden is looking to sort of ramp up his campaign that's really been sidelined by the virus. The president has been criticizing him for quote unquote staying in the basement. He hasn't really been out there all that much. He's done a handful of interviews and whatnot, but he did just before the president's news conference deliver some remarks on the situation in Minneapolis, saying that that racism is the original stain on the U.S. and saying that it needs to be addressed, and really trying to contrast that message with what the president was saying. And also, the president, Vice President Biden had his own issues on race after the comments he made on the Breakfast Club earlier this week. And I'm sure that his allies view this as an opportunity for him to get back on track and put the president on the defensive.
That was just earlier this week. Man, like we said, shortened trading week and shortened week, but man, it's been a busy one. Jordan, thank you so much. I know it's been busy for you as well, and I know there's still more to come as we get
threw a lot at him there. We're like, what about China? What about Twitter? What about Biden?
What are you making this weekend? Are you baking? Are you barbecuing? Jordan Fabian, always appreciate it. Bloomberg News White House correspondent on the phone from Washington, D.C. And he's got another write-through to write up because we got to wait to see what the president has to say. We're going to take everybody to the Rose Garden as soon as President Trump begins speaking. He is expected to address China. We've heard some different things about what may be involved in terms of financial sanctions and certainly dealing with Hong Kong. So as soon as the president begins speaking, we will take you there live to the White House.
All right. First, let's get an update on the trading day. Charlie Pellet standing by with the Bloomberg Business Flash. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, and a perfect day to keep it locked into Bloomberg Radio. Past half hour has really seen quite a difference in what's going on with the stock market. Stocks have pared losses. Bonds have advanced as investors brace for President Trump's latest response in his escalating feud with China. Right now, we've got the S&P little change, down less than 0.1%. Nasdaq up now by 50. That is a gain of 0.5%. We're on track for a winning week here. The Dow down 93, a drop right now of 0.4%. 10-year up 7/32 with a yield of 0.66%. Gold up 0.9%. 17.34 the ounce, and just as importantly, crude now trading back above $35 a barrel, 35.14. Latest quote on WTI, West Texas Intermediate up now by 4.2%. Governor Cuomo says New York City is likely to meet state metrics by next week and reopen June 8th, but face masks won't be going away anytime soon. Dr. Andrew Pekash is a professor of molecular microbiology and immunology at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. He was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television.
Masks are only one part of your protection. They shouldn't be viewed as sort of a panacea, as if I have a mask on, I'll be safe completely from infection. They're just one thing of several that you have to do to protect yourself from the COVID-19 virus.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Occidental Petroleum cutting its quarterly dividend by 91% to cope with the pandemic-driven collapse in energy demand. Shares of Occidental, ticker OXY, Oxy, down by 4.1%. Among some of the other big major energy names, ExxonMobil shares, they're trading higher by 0.4%. BP down 1.1%. Shares of EOG Resources down 1.8%, and Pioneer Natural Resources down 1.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now, a check of world and national news. Here's Bob Moon.
Charlie, thank you. A Minnesota prosecutor has charged a police officer with third-degree murder and manslaughter in the restraint death of George Floyd. Now, Floyd is the handcuffed black man whose cries of "I can't breathe" in a widely seen cell phone video set off days of violent protest in Minneapolis and around the country. Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman said today he may yet bring more charges against the officer, Derek Chauvin. After having one of his often incendiary tweets flagged by Twitter for possibly glorifying violence, President Trump is seeking to clean up his remarks. In his initial tweet, Trump attacked protesters in Minnesota, calling them thugs and warning when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Twitter obscured that tweet with a warning of its own that it could encourage violence. Well, now President Trump is trying to clarify that. He now says that looting leads to shooting, and that's why a man was shot and killed in Minneapolis on Wednesday night. He says, look at what just happened in Louisville with 7 people shot. He says he doesn't want that to happen, and that's what the expression put out last night meant. He also says it was spoken as a fact, and it's very simple. Nobody should have any problem with this or any other of the haters. He said he wants to honor the memory of George Floyd. Global News 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. I'm Bob Moon. Jason, back to you.
All right, Bob, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly, Carol Masser with you. China has been front and center this entire week. We're expecting any minute to hear from the president. Before we take you there, let's get some context leading into it with Dexter Roberts, Mansfield Fellow at the University of Montana, former Bloomberg Business Week China Bureau Chief. He's also the author of a fantastic and timely, relatively new book. Came out earlier this year. It's called The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, The Worker, the Factory, and the Future of the World. He joins us on the phone from Montana. Tiff, really nice to have you back with us. So this has been a pretty remarkable week, and I remember catching up with you earlier in the year, and the Hong Kong protests were still, very much going on in many ways. It was sort of as we were getting into the pandemic. As you look at what's going on between the U.S. and China now, what's the most important thing we need to know?
Well, I think that the decision by Beijing to pursue this national security law, which frankly was a surprise to a lot of the world, is a clear signal that they are not in a mood for compromise. And I think they knew before they made this move through the National People's Congress in Beijing that the response would be overwhelming, and it really has. Condemnation from countries around the world. And frankly, far more, an uptick in the protests in Hong Kong. So they knew this was going to happen, but they decided to go ahead.
Well, what? Okay, so it's interesting. But I am kind of still, curious about the timing of this and why now.
Well, I think that their calculation is that what with COVID-19 and the world being distracted with dealing with the pandemic, they can actually get away with doing this now. And I think it's something they probably intended to do all along. And this seemed like probably an opportunity right now.
And so, what are the implications? I mean, especially from an economic perspective, you know, you ran China for the magazine. You understand the economics of China so well and the economic relationship between the two countries. What's at stake here, in your estimation, Tiff?
Well, I think it's, and I think they are demonstrating that their desire to have clamp down on these growing protests in Hong Kong and have and basically sacrifice this promise they made to give Hong Kong a high degree of autonomy is I mean, they've decided that this is worth doing simply because they cannot tolerate this show of what they see as unrest and what frankly is seen as weakness in Beijing to have these protests ongoing and not have a strong response from Beijing. So I think they've made that calculus. I think the impact is likely to be huge, and particularly on Americans and American companies. We've got, I think, last count, 85,000 Americans living in Hong Kong, over 1,300 American companies, including all our major financial companies. They're all in Hong Kong. And depending on how this unfolds and what we hear from the president later this afternoon, well, very shortly, this you know, there could be a retaliatory move that would strip the special status of Hong Kong, which would have an enormous impact on American business and global business in Hong Kong, and an enormous impact on the Hong Kong economy.
Tiff, why would the Chinese risk that and put that at risk?
I think again, I think we run the risk when we look at China of not realizing how important it is to them to have firm control. And the party, which of course is the government of China, it matters very, very much. Xi Jinping has been very bold about being far more assertive so that the power of the party, the role it's trying to take globally is far more assertive, whether it's Hong Kong or the South China Sea. And I think politics and control. This is a demonstration of sort of the old ways that have sort of resurfaced under Xi, where economics comes second.
Well, is it also, though, they need to do this to survive? You know, Vince Signorella, who watches the markets for us, and he and I have been going back and forth about China all week, and he said, you know, they've got a really pressing problem in China right now. The Communist Party is, 1% of the population. They've only got military to really protect their power base, and there's a lot more pressures coming from the masses, right, who either want change or are not living in a great way, and there's a lot more pressure on the government.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Carol, what you've been discussing there. I think they are aware that they're going to be facing a very difficult economic environment later this year. We've already seen huge layoffs of employees in China. They're readying for a shock to their export sector with the downturn in the rest of the world. And often we've seen the response, somewhat interestingly, somewhat surprisingly perhaps, is to make a gesture like this. And I think part of it is almost an effort to distract the populace from problems at home. Chinese people, they can be quite proud about the rise of China, and this is a way to say, look, foreign forces are trying to hold us back, and they're doing it in Hong Kong, and don't blame us for economic problems at home. Look at what the world's trying to do to China and Hong Kong.
Well, and it's interesting, Tiff, as we think about from our perspective in the world, in the Western world specifically, and what Hong Kong means, I think it's hard to overstate the importance that has. And I think we've talked about this with you before, that it has in the global financial markets. I've been coming back to this time and time again across this week, that it holds a remarkably important place, literally, and I think figuratively in some ways, in being such a key part of the global financial system. Again, as someone who's seen that up close and personal, what's at stake to be a little parochial about it, what's at stake for Wall Street here?
Well, as I said earlier, I mean, we have over 1,300 of our top companies operating in Hong Kong. We have all of our major financial companies.
Yeah.
They've used Hong Kong as a perch in Asia to do business in Greater China, and that role that Hong Kong has played is frankly at greater risk right now than it has been in many years. And so I think the impact could be very, very devastating for Wall Street. And frankly, I'm not very optimistic looking at. I don't think that they've left the U.S. with a lot of choice. I mean, we have this thing called the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act that Trump signed in November, and it states very clearly that the State Department does an annual review, and they have to show that China is still giving Hong Kong a high degree of autonomy, or we have to alter the relationship that we have with them and take away the special privileges that Hong Kong has on tariffs and so on. And quite frankly, the national security law shows that China is no longer guaranteeing that Hong Kong has a high degree of autonomy.
What's interesting, Tiff, is, and you know this so well, you understand China, you understand, foreign businesses coming into China, and the thinking was better for us to be involved in Chinese society, that we will help facilitate change, right? And that was the thinking of a lot of global multinationals. And yet, it hasn't necessarily played out that way, or has it?
I think we were overly optimistic, and that was, of course, the rationale for giving China most favored nation and permanent normal status back under the Clinton administration, and then China entering the World Trade Organization in 2001. And it really hasn't turned out that way. I think it's fair to say that. I remember I was in Beijing in '97 when Hong Kong was returned to the mainland. I remember writing a piece, and this was quite common, saying Hong Kong will change China. The free ideas, the free economy there will change China. And I was wrong, and a lot of other people were wrong as well. China is intent on changing Hong Kong, and they don't seem very concerned about what the rest of the world thinks.
Do they have to be concerned, or can they do their own thing? I mean, they're so massive, and I just do wonder what their role is in the world at large going forward. What does it need to be, or does it not? Can they just kind of do their own thing?
Well, I think they are overestimating their ability to go it alone. But it is worth noting that when Hong Kong was returned to the mainland, its GDP was about 1/5 of the total mainland economy, and now it's about 3%. They haven't made a lot of progress, but there's been efforts by China to build up Shanghai as an alternate financial center. Again, not very much progress made. But it is a fact that Hong Kong is very important, I think, as a sort of symbolic, the policy towards Hong Kong shows us what China's thinking about economic reform. But it is, frankly, less important to China than it was those many years ago.
All right, Dexter, Tiff Roberts, thank you so much. Mansfield Fellow at the University of Montana, former Bloomberg Businessweek China Bureau Chief, author of The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, The Worker, the Factory, and the Future of the World. Let's head down to Washington now and the President of the United States.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm here today to talk about our relationship with China and several new measures to protect American security and prosperity. China's pattern of misconduct is well known. For decades, they've ripped off the United States like no one has ever done before. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year were lost dealing with China, especially over the years during the prior administration. China raided our factories, offshored our jobs, gutted our industries, stole our intellectual property, and violated their commitments under the World Trade Organization. To make matters worse, they are considered a developing nation, getting all sorts of benefits that others, including the United States, are not entitled to. But I have never solely blamed China for this. They were able to get away with the theft like no one was able to get away with before because of past politicians and, frankly, past presidents. But unlike those who came before, my administration negotiated and fought for what was right. It's called fair and reciprocal treatment. China has also unlawfully claimed territory in the Pacific Ocean, threatening freedom of navigation and international trade. And they broke their word to the world on ensuring the autonomy of Hong Kong. The United States wants an open and constructive relationship with China, but achieving that relationship requires us to vigorously defend our national interests. The Chinese government has continually violated its promises to us and so many other nations. These plain facts cannot be overlooked or swept aside. The world is now suffering as a result of the malfeasance of the Chinese government. China's cover-up of the Wuhan virus allowed the disease to spread all over the world, instigating a global pandemic that has cost more than 100,000 American lives and over 1 million lives worldwide. Chinese officials ignored their reporting obligations to the World Health Organization and pressured the World Health Organization to mislead the world when the virus was first discovered by Chinese authorities. Countless lives have been taken and profound economic hardship has been inflicted all around the globe. They strongly recommended against me doing the early ban from China, but I did it anyway and was proven to be 100% correct. China has total control over the World Health Organization, despite only paying $40 million per year compared to what the United States has been paying, which is approximately $450 million a year. We have detailed the reforms that it must make and engage with them directly, but they have refused to act. Because they have failed to make the requested and greatly needed reforms, we will be today terminating our relationship with the World Health Organization and redirecting those funds to other worldwide and deserving urgent global public health needs. The world needs answers from China on the virus. We must have transparency. Why is it that China shut off infected people from Wuhan to all other parts of China? It went nowhere else. It didn't go to Beijing. It went nowhere else. But they allowed them to freely travel throughout the world, including Europe and the United States. The death and destruction caused by this is incalculable. We must have answers not only for us, but for the rest of the world. This pandemic has underscored the crucial importance of building up America's economic independence, reshoring our critical supply chains, and protecting America's scientific and technological advances. For years, the government of China has conducted illicit espionage to steal our industrial secrets, of which there are many. Today, I will issue a proclamation to better secure our nation's vital university research and to suspend the entry of certain foreign nationals from China who we have identified as potential security risks. I am also taking action to protect the integrity of America's financial system, by far the best in the world. I am instructing my presidential working group on financial markets to study the differing practices of Chinese companies listed on the U.S. financial markets with the goal of protecting American investors. Investment firms should not be subjecting their clients to the hidden and undue risks associated with financing Chinese companies that do not play by the same rules. Americans are entitled to fairness and transparency. Several of the most significant actions we're taking pertain to deeply troubling situations unfolding in Hong Kong. This week, China unilaterally imposed control over Hong Kong's security. This was a plain violation of Beijing's treaty obligations with the United Kingdom in the Declaration of 1984 and explicit provisions of Hong Kong's Basic Law. It has 27 years to go. The Chinese government's move against Hong Kong is the latest in a series of measures that are diminishing the city's long-standing and very proud status. This is a tragedy for the people of Hong Kong, the people of China, and indeed the people of the world. China claims it is protecting national security. But the truth is that Hong Kong was secure and prosperous as a free society. Beijing's decision reverses all of that. It extends the reach of China's invasive state security apparatus into what was formerly a bastion of liberty. China's latest incursion, along with other recent developments that degraded the territory's freedoms, makes clear that Hong Kong is no longer sufficiently autonomous to warrant the special treatment that we have afforded the territory since the handover. China has replaced its promised formula of one country, two systems with one country, one system. Therefore, I am directing my administration to begin the process of eliminating policy exemptions that give Hong Kong different and special treatment. My announcement today will affect the full range of agreements we have with Hong Kong, from our extradition treaty to our export controls on dual-use technologies and more, with few exceptions. We will be revising the State Department's travel advisory for Hong Kong to reflect the increased danger of surveillance and punishment by the Chinese state security apparatus. We will take action to revoke Hong Kong's preferential treatment as a separate customs and travel territory from the rest of China. The United States will also take necessary steps to sanction PRC and Hong Kong officials directly or indirectly involved in eroding Hong Kong's autonomy and just, if you take a look, smothering, absolutely smothering Hong Kong's freedom. Our actions will be strong. Our actions will be meaningful. More than 2 decades ago, on a rainy night in 1997, British soldiers lowered the Union flag and Chinese soldiers raised the Chinese flag in Hong Kong. The people of Hong Kong felt simultaneously proud of their Chinese heritage and their unique Hong Kong identity. The people of Hong Kong hoped that in the years and decades to come, China would increasingly come to resemble its most radiant and dynamic city. The rest of the world was electrified by a sense of optimism that Hong Kong was a glimpse into China's future, not that Hong Kong would grow into a reflection of China's past. In every decision, I will continue to proudly defend and protect the workers, families, and citizens of the United States of America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And you have been listening to President Trump there in the Rose Garden making a number of announcements. Carol, pulling funding from the WHO, that is something that he had talked about repeatedly, making that proclamation, also making some proclamations and some decisions related directly to China, leveling some very strong accusations against China, not just around the virus, but around a number of other issues. And as we had been reporting, leveling some sanctions related to protecting financial interests, especially as it relates to Hong Kong.
Yeah, well, and this has to do, going back to their special status, trading status that certainly Hong Kong enjoys because of its respect for the rule of law. And if those things start to change, it becomes a very different entity for the United States to interact with. What's interesting, and I go back to our conversation that we had with White House correspondent Jordan Fabian, was this going to be a full-on news conference, because there's so much going on in our country and our world right now. And so it was interesting to see whether or not he was going to take questions or whether or not it would be just a statement.
Right.
And essentially, that's what it was.
That's exactly what it was. Much more ahead here on Bloomberg, including a look at the economy and what we heard from Chair Jay Powell. This is Bloomberg.
This is WBBR New York, WDCH-FM Bowie, Baltimore, Washington, WJZ-FM HD2 Catonsville, WRCA Watertown, WBOS HD2 Brookline, Boston, WNBP Newburyport, KNEW Oakland, KOSF 103.7 FM HD2 San Francisco, and SiriusXM Satellite Radio Channel 119.
Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. A reversal for the stock market as the president was speaking. The S&P has turned negative, did trade as low as just about 3,001, but right now moving straight up S&P higher by 8 points now at 3,038. That is a gain of 0.3%. The Dow now higher by 10 points, reversing earlier losses. Nasdaq now gaining 76 points, higher by 0.8%. So the Dow, the S&P, Nasdaq all advancing. Stocks did slump earlier in the session on the day's economic news, as well as anticipation of what the president may say about China and Hong Kong. 10-year up 14.30 seconds, looking at a yield right now of 0.64%. Gold up 0.7%, 17.31 the ounce, and crude rallying 4.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude 35.28 a barrel, up right now by $1.57. A Bloomberg exclusive earlier today, we sat down with Loretta Mester, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. She talked about a number of topics, including the outlook for the U.S. economy.
In the third quarter and fourth quarter, we're going to see activity begin to emerge. I think some of the quarterly growth rates are going to overstate what it looks like really out in the field, because we're going to see from a base of very little activity some pickup in activity, and they're going to look like big growth rates, but we're still going to be below where we were at the start of the year in terms of both employment and output.
And one additional headline to pass along to you. President Trump says the U.S. will act to revoke Hong Kong's preferential treatment. Tensions between Twitter and President Trump soared after the social media platform warned users that the president broke its rules against violent speech, prompting critics to accuse the company of unfairly censoring one of its most prominent users. Twitter shares, they are lower today, down now by just about 2.1%. Again, recapping, equities now in the green with the S&P up 8, a gain there of 0.3%. The Dow up 0.1, Nasdaq up 0.8. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, you are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. We're going to keep a close eye on the markets for the last hour of trading here. We did see, as you just heard from Charlie, stocks go down and then go up. So we're going to try and make sense of what the market heard and how they interpreted what the president said. Another important voice we heard from earlier in the day was that of Fed Chair Jay Powell speaking. He's been speaking a lot lately. Let's take a sample of some of the things that he highlighted.
We do have this precious grant of independence, and that really means that we need to stay in our lane and just do those things that Congress assigns us to do. The tools that we're using now are lending tools, not spending tools. So we don't have the ability to make grants of money to particular groups of people, no matter how directly they're affected. We crossed a lot of red lines that had not been crossed before, and I'm very comfortable that this is that situation in which you do that, and then you figure it out afterward. A second wave would really undermine public confidence and might make for a longer, a significantly longer recovery and weaker recovery.
All right, and that was Fed Chair Jay Powell speaking earlier with Alan Blinder, of course, formerly of the Fed as well. They were doing a Princeton event virtually.
Did you hear what he said? He used your line. Lending, not spending.
I know, the T-shirts,
The World
right?
Tour, 2020 World Tour, lending, not spending.
JPOW, the World Tour.
JP and the Feds, even some of the former Feds. Alan Blinder, as you said, coming in. Let's bring in one of our favorites, Yelena Shalecheva, senior U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics, joining us on the phone from Long Island. All right, so you heard a little bit of the smorgasbord there from the Fed chair, Yelena. What's the most important thing you heard from Jay Powell?
Yes, hi. So I would say that the bits that you played basically suggest that the Fed will not stop, will not hesitate to do whatever it takes to support economic growth. And they would like to be very transparent about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So to me also, what was very interesting in today's remarks was a confirmation that lending facilities will be key front and center of the Fed's actions going forward, and the key area for the expansion in the balance sheet. Since the Fed is actually tapering QE purchases, they will focus more and more on this lending programs going forward in coming months. So he highlighted the multifaceted nature of engaging in the extraordinary powers under the so-called 13.3 section of the Federal Reserve Act, unusual and exigent circumstances. Not only were they able to backstop financial markets without even starting to lend under these new programs, but also they will try to address the key issue of this economic crisis, the job losses, by lending to different sized businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, and try to tailor these lending programs towards their needs.
Yeah, and I was listening to some of what he said out. I mean, you're talking about pretty small amounts of money, but for a small business, that's a game changer. I'm still kind of blown away that here we are in week 11, and then this money is just starting to go out. And I do want to point out about a half an hour, we did get ahead that the Fed's slowing the pace of Treasury buying to $4.5 billion a day from $5 billion. So they're continuing to slow down and back off of that. But I do worry, Yelena, you watch the economy, you watch big businesses, small businesses. I do wonder about how many small businesses are not going to make it through because the money's just coming too late.
Well, some of them will not, and we will see some data on that front in the releases that we will get next week. So one of them obviously is the payrolls report that we're going to get on Friday, but before we get that, we will also receive the data from ADP on and ADP actually splits private payrolls not only by industry but also by the size of companies. So that will be an interesting metric to assess how different businesses of different sizes are faring this crisis. So that is coming out on Wednesday. But in terms of bigger payrolls report from BLS that we are going to get on Friday, we will get a smaller decline, but that's not a small one by historical standards. So following a 20%, a 20 million decline in jobs in April, we will probably get something closer to 7 to 8 million job losses reported for the month of May. So, and we will also see a spike in the unemployment rate. And our expectations are for 20% unemployment rate in the month of May. This is actually very close to the peak levels that we observed during the Great Depression. One green shoot I should offer probably is jobless claims. So we already saw yesterday in the weekly claims report that continuing claims ticked down a little bit. So that is a positive sign. This is one of the very few nascent signs of recovery as states are starting to reopen. But we actually need to see that continue for several weeks to actually confirm that the labor market is on the mend. So I would say that we should continue to watch claims as closely as we were during those several past weeks. And also one interesting data that I would like to point out next week will be auto sales. We will probably see a rebound in auto sales, and that's going to be another very first initial green shoot. But that is probably not going to be a very strong one. But this will allow us to assess how much demand was lost due to the shutdowns and how much demand will be lost during the loss in personal income.
And we recently caught up with the head of Porsche North America, and he talked about how a lot of their dealerships are reopening or have reopened back in the U.S. So certainly that should match up with some of that data points, or we'll see how it plays out. All right, let's get back to World and National News headlines. Yelena, thank you. Right now, let's toss it over to Bob Moon.
And thank you very much. President Trump says the U.S. will act to revoke Hong Kong's preferential treatment. He says China unilaterally imposed control over Hong Kong's security, and Trump says he's directed his administration to eliminate policies that give Hong Kong special treatment, including extradition treaties and export controls. Trump says investment firms should not expose clients to China's risk, and he says the U.S. will sanction Chinese officials involved in smothering Hong Kong's autonomy. At the same time, the president put the blame for the COVID-19 pandemic squarely on China.
Why is it that China shut off infected people from Wuhan to all other parts of China? It went nowhere else. It didn't go to Beijing. It went nowhere else. But they allowed them to freely travel throughout the world, including Europe and the United States. The death and destruction caused by this is incalculable. We must have answers, not only for us, but for the rest of the world.
The president also says the U.S. will terminate its relationship with the World Health Organization, which he is accused of being under Chinese control and failing to provide accurate information about the spread of the coronavirus. The Minneapolis police officer who was seen on video kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, a handcuffed black man who died in custody after pleading that he could not breathe, the police officer was arrested today and charged with murder. Global News 24 hours a day. I'm Bob Moon.
Bob, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, aside from what President Trump said about China, your most read story over the past hour, Carol, not surprisingly, New York City. It is on track to open in 2 weeks. That's according to the governor, Andrew Cuomo. Now, let's be clear. To open in 2 weeks means the beginning of a long reopening process.
Well, I got to tell you, you know, this is a big story when your 17-year-old yesterday was walking by, Mom, you know how many metrics the city has met in terms of a reopening? So it's on everyone's mind. She's definitely missing her friends. So, yeah, New York City likely to meet state metrics by next week, reopen June 8th, according to Governor Cuomo. The city's got to have a stockpile of personal protective equipment, so the PPE and enough contact tracers. This has been key. Plus, also big, the transit system's got to be ready for the increase in traffic. So, this is what it's going to take. But as you said, Jason, so it opens up, and then you've got to give that first phase a couple of weeks to see how it goes and to make sure the numbers don't start to trend higher. But this is a big deal.
It is a big deal, and this is what folks have been waiting for. As we've been talking about, this was the last region, as you say, of New York State to open. And it's interesting, other parts of the state, they're actually on to phase 2 as of today. We're talking about North Country, Finger Lakes, Central New York, Mohawk Valley, and Southern Tier. And so that's good news that they have sort of met all the metrics to get to the second phase as well.
What I also think was interesting, visuals can be very important, and you had both New York City, Bill de Blasio, he joined Governor Cuomo by video, and so to see those two, because they haven't always been on the same page about things in the past.
A nice way of putting it.
Yeah, it's my Friday mode. That's what happens. Everything gets a little softer.
They haven't always been bros.
Exactly. But anyway, they are together about this. So full speed ahead, fingers crossed, and let's hope so.
I
have
say
to say
ahead. I don't know if it's full speed quite yet.
It's more like the tortoise kind of move.
Yeah, it's like let's inching towards some sense of the next normal. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Bloomberg Business Week. We're brought to you by National Realty, NRIA, developers of high return income producing properties for investor partners. See them at nria.net.
Correcto, también tenemos la función minuto. Igual, minuto, selecciono la hora y Excel me va a arrojar los minutos. Interesante. También tenemos segundos. Voy a agregarlo. Mire, cuando yo selecciono, ¿sí? Vamos a ponerle 23 segundos. Correcto. Le vamos a poner 23 segundos. Ya está. Entonces, ojo que esta función tiene 9 horas, 30 minutos y 23 segundos. Es el formato que me dice Excel. Si yo quiero ver los segundos, también tenemos la función segundos, igual segundo, selecciono la hora y Excel me va a dar los segundos. Correcto. Entonces, eso es lo interesante. También tenemos la función ns hora. Esta función sí es bonita, porque esta función devuelve cualquier hora si tiene los datos de la hora, minutos y segundos por separado. Se puede utilizar esta función tiempo para obtener un dato tipo hora. ¿Sí? La función es ns hora y ahorita vamos a hacer el ejemplo. ¿Sí? Vamos a ver que tenga una hora, un minuto y un segundo. Vamos a decirle 10, 20 y 35. ¿Sí? Entonces yo le digo igual ns hora y selecciono hora, punto y coma, en mi separador, minuto, punto y
Markets,
coma.
headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day.
Y enter y ya tengo, ¿sí? 10 y 20 con 35 minutos. Vamos a cambiar el formato para verlo todo. Clic derecho, formato de celdas, correcto. Miren, aquí está el formato de hora. Voy a formato de hora y voy a elegir el formato que me muestre todo, que es esto. Por darle a aceptar, ahí está. ¿Sí? Recuerden que hice clic derecho, formato de celdas. Me fui, ¿sí?, en la categoría hora, seleccioné el formato para que me muestre completo los segundos y ya tengo 10, 20 y 35 segundos. 10 horas, 20 minutos y 35 segundos. Interesante. Interesante. Espero que esto les sirva cuando comenzamos a trabajar. Ahora sí vamos a hacer las funciones de texto. Hemos visto funciones fecha y hora y ahora hacemos las funciones de texto. Aquí sí hay un cambio. Correcto. Las funciones de texto son consideradas un conjunto de caracteres alfanuméricos que no son valores numéricos, fecha, horas y fórmulas. Los nombres, las palabras son textos, al igual que los valores precedidos de una comilla simple. Los valores de textos también se denominan cadenas.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. 43 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Volatile final hour of trading right now. We've got the Dow lower, S&P higher, Nasdaq higher as well. Let's get all the details as we head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Big warm welcome. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. Like you said, U.S. stocks in a choppy session today as Trump stopped short of implementing economic restrictions against China. Dow's currently down 23 points, was down 369 points. S&Ps are higher by 5. Nasdaq climbs by 71. The U.S. 10-year yield at 0.64%. WTI crude futures are up 4%. Gold gains 10, and transports are little changed. Leaders in the Dow, Intel, Cisco, and Home Depot, Raytheon, Boeing, and American Express led to the downside. After earnings, Costco fell 1%, Salesforce dropped 4%, and in other news, Tencent is in talks to buy a Warner Music stake. Wrapping things up, Beyond Meat to partner with Pizza Hut and KFC in China, shares spiked off that headline. Wrapping things up, live from the First Word Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, I thank you very much, Bill Maloney. Have a great weekend, and to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg type squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, you know, Jason, one thing that's happening as a result of the pandemic is the pharma and biotech community and companies, really.
And companies.
Yeah, have kicked into high gear big time, pivoting where they need to, just trying to figure out how to deal with this virus. This story is so cool, and it feeds into, I love genetics, and this story in Business Week is about a biotech startup that really aims to make use of humanity's genetic outliers. It's called Rare DNA, to really help deal with a lot of issues that are out there, but also related ones. Bloomberg Business Week feature writer and New York Times bestselling author Ashley Vance, he wrote this story on Variant Bio. We'll find out about that company in just a moment. Ashley, by the way, host of Hello World. He joins us on the phone from Palo Alto. Also here is Bloomberg Business Week editor Joel Weber. He's on the phone from Brooklyn. This is a really cool story, Joel.
Yeah, anytime Ashley's raises his hand and wants to do something in sort of biotech or science with crazy people, you're always interested. But what really caught my eye was when he took to Twitter to start talking about the story, and it was just like such a great simplification of it, which is like, don't we all want to be superheroes? Ashley, what are these guys working on?
Yes, I mean, this is a crazy one. The company Variant Bio is essentially got people that are going all over the world to try to find very unique humans, usually kind of isolated indigenous populations where, one example we have. Yeah, X-Men, exactly. One example we have in the story is the Sherpa people in Nepal. So typically people that live at high altitudes, they adapt over time to have oxygen levels that are the same as the rest of us, whereas the Sherpas actually, they survive in what would be a hypoxic or oxygen-starved state for the rest of us, and they leave these healthy, active lifestyles. And so the thought is, you study their DNA, you find out what makes them special, and then you develop a drug or a therapy based on that. And so in the case of something like COVID, where people are suffering from hypoxia, maybe you have a therapy that helps alleviate a lot of those stresses. And so going around the world and finding all kinds of these superpowers and then developing drugs based off them.
So Ashley, that's like the ultimate science project in many ways. How can you get your arms around? How can we get our arms around the chances, the efficacy? What do you make of it? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, and with any drug discovery program, this is like a multi-year process. But there's examples of where this has been done in the past. So there are mainstream cholesterol drugs, for example, that are based off of the genes of people of African descent who seem to have very low LDL or bad cholesterol levels. Like we know the science works. The weird thing is that nobody's tried this approach on quite this like systemic, large-scale effort. The biggest gene sequencing stuff that we all know about is like 23andMe and Ancestry, and they're sort of sequencing tons of people with relatively similar DNA and then hoping to study this massive data and find interesting insights, whereas these guys are reading papers and studies about these very unique people and then going sort of straight to them where they know that there's something interesting there already. But it becomes a question of how long does it take to develop these things, and it's many years for sure.
And so, all right, Ashley, go ahead, Joel.
Well, that's I kind of just want to know, like, if they can pull this off, like, where does their version of their company, where do they go?
Yeah, I mean, this is, we're talking about them partnering with large pharmaceutical companies to actually get the drugs to market. And like on this journey, I should point out, I mean, there's huge questions around the ethics and morals of all this. One of the biggest reasons this hasn't been done before is that you have to find these people, you have to be careful about how you work with them, and then hopefully come up with some sort of compensation model where maybe they get subsidized or free versions of the drugs, they get the data based on this, and then maybe even like royalties off of a drug. And so, the company is already operating in the Faroe Islands, in Pakistan, and New Zealand, and Nepal, and so they're, over the next couple of years, just going to expand out these locations and then get to the drug discovery work.
Hey, I do wonder, Ashley, too, that because of COVID-19, has it made them kind of step up their efforts?
Well, Sort of, it's gone the opposite way, actually.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, like in Nepal, they were pretty far along, and the study in Nepal would be the one that's most applicable to COVID, and they were ready. They've already been there for months. They were ready to get all these deals signed, and now, the principals can't sort of travel to Nepal to do some of this work on the ground. And so I talked to a doctor there who's been working with variants, and he was like, look, we thought we were going to have this all go in the summer, and now maybe it's like the end of this year or rolling into next year. So, this is a company that has to literally scour the earth and travel and do all this stuff, and so it's made it tricky.
All right, Ashley Vance, it's a great piece as always. Love your writing. Love catching up with you, and looking forward to catching up with you soon to talk SpaceX as well. That scrubbed launch we believe is rescheduled for this weekend, so eager to hear what comes out on the other side of that. Ashley Vance, feature writer, and as Carol pointed out, best-selling author, host of Hello World, joining us on the phone from Palo Alto. Our thanks to Joel Weber, the editor of the magazine.
This is just a reminder that there's still so much about the human body we do not understand and know, and I do think that medical treatment will be based more on how do you take the body and what's here already and just work with it to improve it. So really great story. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week on this Friday. This is Bloomberg.
quiero ya el descuento, diría igual sí, paréntesis, correcto, el pago en efectivo, sería igual, el pago efectivo,
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
I need a little music.
I know. It's already that time.
Right?
Excited that we're going to get our Friday dose of Dave Wilson. His chart of the day, his song of the day. It's all coming together.
His tie of the day. Oh, maybe he probably doesn't have a tie on. He's at home.
I am guessing he does not.
All right, we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's get back to your top business stories. Another check on the trading day bouncing around, but we're back near our highs here, Charlie Pellet, but still a little change.
Absolutely right about that, but let me put bouncing around in perspective. Worst level of the day, we had the Dow down 368 points. Right now, we have got the Dow up by 1 point. We'll call that flat. S&P is up 9, a gain there of 0.3%. Nasdaq up 88, higher by 1%. 28 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks erase losses, trading little changed after President Trump stopped short of implementing draconian economic restrictions against China, even as he blasted the country for its actions on the pandemic and in Hong Kong. So again, the S&P up by 10. We have got the 10-year up 13.30 seconds with a yield of 0.64%. Gold up 0.8%, 17.31 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude rallying 3.4% now at 34.86 a barrel, but during the session did trade above $35. Speaking of oil, Occidental Petroleum cutting its quarterly dividend by 91% to cope with the pandemic-driven collapse in energy demand that has strained the oil explorer's ability to shoulder its debt. That dividend going down to 1 cent. 1 penny have been 11 cents. As for Occidental Petroleum shares, they're down 3.6%. Among some of the other big names in the energy industry, ExxonMobil shares up 1.1%. BP is down 0.4%. EOG Resources down 1.6%. Pioneer Natural Resources lower now by 1.2%. It is 3:33 on Wall Street. That means it's time for the Small Business Report. And now here's John Tucker.
For nearly 60 years, skaters and hockey players have made their way to Ocean Ice Palace and its pro shop in Brick, New Jersey. The summer months are actually some of their busiest, but manager and part owner Andrew Barton had to close the doors as part of the pandemic-related shutdowns. So, Andrew, nobody's skating right now.
Yes, sir. So the ice is completely closed. The state ordered that. The shop itself, we work hard to do everything we can do online, selling that space. I got my team there actually working now to try to upload to the new Facebook feature where you can use the store. Curbside pickup is there. We've done a few things here and there, but realistically, nobody's skating. And if you're not skating, you don't need hockey sticks. You don't need hockey skates.
Well, how long can you sustain this?
I wish I knew the answer to that. You know, I've been kind of relying on our local elected officials to give me some information. And, you know, I think it's easy to criticize, and I don't mean in that manner, but I would love to see a solid timeline. You know, we kind of decided that for us to take the ice out is equivalent to about a month's worth of carrying costs.
What's the overhead for maintaining ice?
Just to maintain the ice, you know, don't include any labor or anything of that nature. We run electric equipment back there. We're looking at probably $12,000 to $15,000 monthly just for utilities. So we do want to make sure we stay in a position where we're ready to go if we're allowed to go.
Yeah, Andrew Barton at the Ocean Ice Palace in Brick, New Jersey. That's your Bloomberg Small Business Report.
And we thank you very much, John Tucker. And again, recapping here, equities higher with the S&P up 5, gain of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Catch up with you later. In the meantime, this is Bloomberg.
A little Clapton. Hello?
Good.
Yeah.
Almond.
Yeah.
Etc.
Yeah.
So
This is
many.
so great.
Derek and the Dominoes.
Yeah, totally, right? Oh my God, so many bands. That's really sweet.
You know,
That's
I
a
have to
gift.
say-
That's my weekend gift. Thank you, Dave Wilson.
Yeah, it's a nice one. Dave, I heard I think there's a great cover of that, or I have heard a cover of that from Tedeschi Trucks.
Who also plays with Clapton all the time.
Yeah, which is, I saw them at Red Rocks, Quick Flex.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah, it was
They are
incredible.
so incredible.
Drive-By Truckers opened, and Tedeschi Trucks, Red Rocks, one of the best shows I've ever seen. Incredible. Anyway, Dave Wilson, what a weekend
I love that
gift.
couple. They're just like
Yeah.
so cool. My next
Super
life,
cool.
right?
Yeah.
It's kind of what
You want to be Susan Tedeschi?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. All right, Dave Wilson. We know you've got a chart. We'll get there.
Well,
What do
you
you got?
don't have to learn to play guitar to figure out this one. Let's put it that way. It's all about, growth stocks. I mean, you look at the relationship between growth and value indexes. You can pick the S&P 500. If you want a broader look, you can pick the Russell 1000. And you're seeing ratios between the two indicators back to where they were in 2000 when, of course, you had that internet-driven bull market of the 1990s peaking. So here we are again. Now the question is, what about valuation? And it's a question that the folks at Bank of America, specifically analysts Steven Sutmeyer and Jordan Young, tackled in their latest research, looking at the price-earnings ratios for the Russell 1000 growth and value indexes, and just doing a simple, subtraction to produce a spread between the two. And when you do that, you find out, sure, the growth stocks are more expensive, but nowhere near as expensive in relative terms as they were back 20 years ago when stocks were peaking. So basically, their take is that what we saw this week with the value stocks kind of getting a bit of a rebound in relative terms, maybe it doesn't last for long because there's certainly enough room in terms of valuation for growth stocks to reassert themselves. Now, I'll just point out, too, that you could run the same analysis with ratios, and Michael Darda at MCAM Partners actually did that in a report out yesterday, and you come to the same results. So it really doesn't matter whether you're doing division or subtraction, you end up in the same place, with growth stocks more expensive, but nowhere near as expensive as they were at the height of the market in 2000.
So in other words, Dave, don't give up on growth stocks.
That's kind of the message here, Carol. And if you want to know more, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
What you doing this weekend, Dave Wilson?
That's a good question. I haven't thought that far ahead.
So you're just going to wing it, right? Whatever kind of comes to you? Okay.
Just a free spirit, Dave Wilson.
Chillax.
Chillax. Wow.
What are you doing, Carol Masser? Chillaxing? Gardening?
Believe it or not, we have a bunch of virtual college tours lined up for tomorrow. And I think it's supposed to rain, so I'm okay. We wanted to do some painting outside, so maybe that'll be Sunday. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
Jason?
Hanging around. Maybe listen to some music.
Maybe listen to your podcast. You've got a great podcast.
I do. Yeah, it is a big podcast. Rich Paul, one of the most prominent agents in basketball and beyond.
Who does he represent?
A guy named LeBron James, Anthony Davis. Yeah, a few people you've heard of. Number 2 and number 3 picks in this year's NFL draft, by the way, expanding into the NFL. Great sort of philosophical conversation with him, actually. We'll hear a little bit about it later on in the show. Yeah. How he built his business, some stuff I'll tell you about later.
All right, well, our thanks to Dave Wilson. He's going to be back later on with his stock of the day. Right now, though, back to World and National News headlines and back to Bob Moon.
Carol, President Trump stuck to the script on China today, formally rolling out all of the proposals that have been aired in the media this week, from limiting visas to Chinese citizens, reviewing the U.S. listings of Chinese companies, and retracting, Hong Kong's special trade status. There's also the possibility of sanctions on officials involved in, as he called it, smothering Hong Kong's freedom.
China's latest incursion, along with other recent developments that degraded the territory's freedoms, makes clear that Hong Kong is no longer sufficiently autonomous to warrant the special treatment that we have afforded the territory since the handover.
The police officer who was seen on video kneeling on the neck of George Floyd has been arrested. From Rodney King to George Floyd, connecting dot after dot, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo today lamented that the same situation keeps happening again and again and again.
And I think all well-meaning Americans stand with the protesters. Enough is enough. How many times do you have to see the same lesson replayed before you do something?
Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman said today that Derek Chauvin was charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. Global News 24 hours a day, on air, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Bob Moon.
All right, Bob Moon, thank you so much. Well, we're starting to talk more and more about how nations recover, how states recover, how cities recover, and not surprisingly, folks are starting to worry about, maybe very appropriately, how we're going to pay for all this, Carol. And Citi, at least one banker, he's got an idea, and maybe not good news for the bank accounts of the very wealthy.
Well, we're talking about taxation, right?
Yes.
More taxation. It's interesting. So this is the London-based region head for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at Citigroup's private bank saying, here's a quote, "Wealth will become much more significant to any country's economic and policy solutions. It could be taxation, it could be by coordination with the people who have the wealth, and it could be by expropriation." You know, we're going to go into an interesting time where we know cities are hurt, states are hurt. The economy may be subpar. There could be a lot of people whose temporary layoffs become permanent, just at a tough time. And you do wonder, how do you make up certainly the lost revenues and lost tax revenues that go into governments to enable them to do things?
Yeah, it is. And different countries are going to have different approaches to this for sure. We don't know exactly what the approach is going to be here in the United States for sure. And we also know that different countries in Europe are going to have different approaches. But it is something that there will be some sort of reckoning. I think there has to be.
I think there kind of has to be. I mean, we've talked so much about inequalities with so many of our guests, and I feel like we've been talking about this for several years now. I mean, the World Economic Forum has been talking about it for years, and I just do, at some point, enough with the talking, and let's do things, and let's figure out how do we make it better. Let's think a little bit longer term and create some initiatives that really have a difference and that decrease those gaps that are out there in our society. We should be able to do this.
We should be. We should be. And, you know, you would like to think that in a time like this, this is the time to act, but sometimes people get frightened of these big decisions. All right.
En el hipotético caso, vamos a abrir las ventanas y estas son las ventanas que ustedes quieran. Ya, tengo ventanas, voy a abrir 3 ventanas. Si voy a abrir 3 ventanas, 3 opciones de Excel, aquí están los 3 archivos. Y yo puedo esto, ¿sí? Puedo esto organizar estas ventanas para poder trabajar, para no estar haciendo esto, ¿sí? Pero he tratado que si pierdo mi tiempo. Yo lo puedo ver todo en una ventana. ¿Cómo lo hago eso? Aquí. En pestaña vista, ¿sí? Grupo sub, organizar todo. Cuando le hago clic en organizar todo, me va a decir que todas las ventanas de Excel las va a organizar. Lo voy a poner en mosaico, está bien, ¿sí? Porque puedo elegir horizontal, vertical y cascada, vamos a dejar en mosaico, le damos a aceptar. Y miren que aquí ya tengo las 3 ventanas de Excel, ¿sí? Con las cuales yo puedo seleccionar y puedo trabajar en cada una de ellas. ¿Correcto? ¿Sí? Entonces, esa es la forma de cómo poder organizar nuestras ventanas, ¿sí? Entonces ya tenemos la 12.000, 13.000 filas, imagínense. Entonces, para hallar un dato rápido, lo divido. Si quiero deshacer esa opción, ¿cómo hago? Clic acá en dividir y ya está. En el mismo botón, clic en dividir y ya se desactiva la opción de dividir. Inmovilizar ventanas. Esto es muy interesante porque puedo inmovilizarlas de tres formas. Esto es lo que se usa bastante. Lo mismo me va a pasar. ¿Qué pasaría si yo quiero seguir viendo el encabezado abajo? Sí, entonces me es muy complicado. Correcto. Entonces, inmovilizar ventanas. Voy a elegir la hoja lápiz ahora. Tengo bastante recursos aquí. Y voy a seleccionar la fila 2. Me voy al financiera, sería vista y elijo la opción de inmovilizar. Vamos a elegir la primera, inmovilizar paneles. ¿Qué significa cuando inmovilizo paneles? Miren, yo bajo y mi encabezado sigue movilizado hacia encabezados. Se movilizó. O sea, interesante. Correcto. Para deshacer lo mismo, selecciono, inmovilizar y clic acá de nuevo. Ahora sí.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow and Nasdaq, actually the S&P and Nasdaq, they're both higher. We've got the Dow lower right now. Stocks erasing losses, trading mostly higher after President Trump stopped short of implementing draconian economic restrictions against China, even as he blasted the country for its actions on the pandemic, as well as Hong Kong. S&P up 7 now. That's a gain of about 0.3%. The Dow, which had been down 368 points, now looking at a loss of 46, down 0.2. So a big recovery for the Dow. Nasdaq holding on to a gain now, up by 100 points. That is up by 1.1%. And should point out that in the year-to-date column, Nasdaq on the year up now by 5.5%. 10-year yield 0.64%. We've got gold up 0.8%, 17.32 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude was trading above $35. Right now it is at $34.97. WTI up today by 3.7%. So again, recapping here, the Dow lower, S&P up 8. That is a gain of 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
It is time for the drive to the close. And you know, Jason, as Charlie mentioned earlier, man, we have seen tremendous swings in today's trade alone. He mentioned the Dow at its low was down about 369 points. At its highs was up about 82 points. And right now we're little changed. So it's really been a very volatile day. Let's talk about it. Our next guest has been managing money for over 4 decades. Barry James is with us, portfolio manager at the Ohio-based James Investment Research, and he joins us on the phone from Ohio. Barry, how's life in Ohio right now?
Well, we're coming back to life. Let me put it that way. Where I am in the Dayton area wasn't hit very hard, and it seems that folks are doing what they're supposed to do here, and I'm getting my crew back into our offices now as well. So it seems to be going forward.
And so, what is that like? I mean, to running a business, because I think so many times we talk to investors like yourself, Barry, and we talk macro, and we talk markets, and we talk stocks, and we're going to do all of those things. But you're also running a business. You have to think about your people, and that's a very, as they say, important asset. Maybe your most important asset. I do wonder what sort of process you go through of sort of getting back to it.
Well, what we're doing is gradual. Most of the folks can work at home and have been working at home, and so what we've got is over the next month we'll be staggering people in and then going to more of a full complement here in the office. But a lot of folks can work from home, and if anybody's uncomfortable, they can come in.
Right. Yeah, and I was going to say probably we'll choose to continue doing that for either part of the time or most of the time, whatever that is. It's interesting how we've all adjusted so dramatically. Well, speaking of adjustments, how have you adjusted your investments in this market? I think a lot of people, looking at their 401ks and their IRAs, have seen a really remarkable bounce back over the past few months. We're going to end this week in the green. What's your strategy here?
Well, you're absolutely right. It has been kind of on the retail side that has really been supporting this and pushing it up, because institutional guys like me haven't been quite so positive. We're still holding some cash back. We see things as kind of BC-AD, the time thing. BC is before coronavirus and AD is after the disease. And so as we look at this right now, it's kind of like a character in the Truman Show. Everything's happy and good, and yet behind things are a little ominous. And I don't think that's quite realized yet, just how bad earnings are going to be. So much as expectations are down 42% for this quarter. And the consumers aren't spending. They've just, I still have the same money in my wallet from about a month and a half ago. That's not good for the economy. So those things, I think, will start to seep into people's mindsets. And this rally may wind up taking a little bit of a breather. And so that's what we're looking for, is that breather, and then possibly do some buying then, because there is some built-up demand, I think, that will be coming out over the next couple quarters.
It's so funny, just as you said that, we were thinking, and our producer Paul Brennan thinking the same thing when we talked with Jen Rosenthal at Tribeca, talking about productions and filming and content, but that whole idea of AC and BC, before Corona and after Corona, like our world will be split in those ways. And I do feel like, Barry, because we are seeing more reopening, New York City, being much more formal and specific about, looking now with putting out a date about the possibility of opening up, with phase 1. So you do feel like things are getting back to quote unquote normal. So tell me about how you look at the market. Have we bottomed out? Do we stay here? Do we start to climb as new data points start to maybe hopefully reflect the other side, AC, after Corona?
Well, a lot of people have a fear of missing out. I think that's what's driving the market now, because any news is good news, whether it's slapping China on the hand or troubles in the middle part of our country. The market just seems to ignore it. So there is definitely that upward pull for the moment. But as we look at it, there's valuations are actually right back to where they were before this decline, and in some cases even higher than they've been, like all the way back to 2000. So you've got that. You've got the poor earnings scenario that we have unfolding, and I view this more as a broken leg. Had one after parachuting accident in my youth, and it takes a while to repair, and I think that's what's happened. The economy's had a break, and it's going to take a little while for this to come back.
Talk to us a little bit about Costco. We heard their earnings. It is obviously a popular brand. I live in the New York suburbs, and we got a couple within a few miles of us. And certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, there were literal, lines and lines of cars and folks lining up to get in. But how has that name, how has it performed for you, and what do you think about it going forward?
Well, it's done well for us in this environment, and it's a very solid company. It's kind of best in class in terms of the retailer. It's had some extra costs. I think that came out today in the news with the whole coronavirus things in terms of sanitation and wages and the like. But they've really made a huge dent, I think, in the e-commerce area, big jump, over 60% jump, and that'll probably be something that carries over for quite some time. So hold up well, we expect, regardless of what happens, if we have a second wave or not. And we see it as a company that has what it takes to get through this time.
Hey, just got about 20, 30 seconds here. Verizon's another one. We've talked several times with Hans Vestberg, the CEO of the company. What is it, just quickly, Barry, that you like about Verizon?
Well, good payout.
The dividend.
4.3 dividend and the rock solid balance sheet. It's not that correlated. The price, the movements aren't that correlated with the stock market overall. It's very, very sticky business. It's a consumer staple almost. You could call it that. And this 5G is going to be good for them for quite some time, and it should really start to monetize in 2021.
All right, Barry James, good to get some time with you. Good luck with the great reopening as we all face that down. Portfolio manager for James Investment Research joining us on the phone from the Dayton area, Carol. And it looks like if things hold on, we're going to be up for the day, and we know we're going to be up for the week across all the major indices.
And Vince Signorello was talking about, us moving up here and maybe finishing by the in the green, and that's exactly what we're seeing. And we've seen a rally for the week overall. Huh? I hear the ice clinking for Vince. All right, stick around, folks. We've got the closing bell for you in just a moment right here on Bloomberg Radio.
Ese es el primer nivel, segundo nivel y tercer nivel. Si el primer nivel está bien ordenado, el resto solamente se adecua. Y acá no es error. ¿Por qué? Porque, miren, si nosotros nos ponemos a pensar, correcto, hay tres. Argentina son tres opciones. Argentina tiene un Buenos Aires y dos Córdoba. Está bien, lo ha ordenado bien. ¿Sí? Pero Buenos Aires es uno solo y tiene repostería, está bien. Luego viene Córdoba con la sede de condimentos y la de México. O sea, sí lo ordena, pero lo va a ordenar en base a los niveles, en base a los niveles, a las categorías que uno desea ordenar. En Brasil también lo podemos ver, mira, hay un montón. ¿Sí? Y también lo ordena aquí, por ciudad, miren. Cada ciudad tiene su propia categoría. Por ejemplo, en Río de Janeiro, tenemos alfabeto. Ahí está, el orden alfabético. Entonces, sí está ordenado en forma alfabética, solo hay que saberlo esta. ¿Sí? Entonces, vamos a poder ordenar. Muy bien, lo vamos a poner a filtros. Vamos a hacer filtros. ¿Qué son los filtros? Los filtros son excelentes en Excel porque nos ayudan a buscar información de una manera muy rápida. ¿Sí? Entonces, si yo me pongo dentro de la base de datos, yo le voy a decir en datos y voy a seleccionar acá a este embudo, este filtro. Y van a ver que cada encabezado les aparecen estos pequeños botoncitos. Estos botones se llaman controladores de filtro. Y tienen para filtrar. Por ejemplo, si yo quisiera ver ahora los clientes, todos los clientes, ¿sí? Desactivo acá para que se seleccione todo y voy a decir quiero buscar solamente al cliente Pedro. Acepto, me va a buscar todo lo concerniente con el cliente Pedro. Correcto, cuánto ganó, ¿sí? Qué productos tiene, qué unidades tiene, qué cantidades, todo con Pedro. Entonces, ¿cómo sé que una hoja de Excel tiene filtro? Primero por esto, o sea, yo sé que tiene filtro, pero ¿cómo sé qué campo se usa un filtro? Porque me aparece este embudo aquí. Ese embudo significa qué cosa, que Excel tiene esa columna que tiene ese campo tiene filtro. ¿Por qué? Porque me aparece el embudo. Si yo le hago clic acá al embudo, también puedo eliminar el filtro. O sea, yo puedo modificarlo, puedo agregar otro nombre, por ejemplo Marta, para que aparezcan los dos Pedro y Marta, o si no, lo elimino. Clic aquí, le doy clic al botón, eliminar filtro, ya tengo eliminado. Correcto. Si quiero que se aparezca el embudo, clic acá de nuevo filtro y ya, dejo de filtrar. Correcto. Pero vamos a ponernos, hemos hecho un filtro automático, como un filtro personalizado. El filtro personalizado es un filtro que me pide ya más criterios. Correcto. Es un filtro que me pide ya mucho más criterios. Y eso es interesante saberlo. Ya,
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. There you have it. Sound of the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange as we wrap up trading on this Friday, May 29th, and it is on to the weekend and on to the trading month of June. Humberto Lima of Coca-Cola FEMSA Brazil, by the way, virtually ringing that closing bell. Stocks erased losses with the S&P 500 index picking up 14 points, a gain of 0.5%. Nasdaq surged 120 points, up 1.3%. The Dow swinging between gains and losses. It was a down day, though, dropping 17 points. Had been higher right into the close. A decline today of 0.1%. But at the worst level of the session, the Dow had been down 1.4%, have been down by about 368 points. So what about the overall mood of the market? Barry James is portfolio manager at James Investment Research. He was our guest moments ago right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
A lot of people have a fear of missing out. I think that's what's driving the market now, because any news is good news, whether it's slapping China on the hand or troubles in the middle part of our country. The market just seems to ignore it. So there is definitely that upward pull for the moment.
And again, an upward pull for the S&P, up 14, up 0.5%. Your 10-year, the yield there, 0.65%. Gold up 0.8%, 17.31 the ounce. Crude, big rally there, up 4.1%. 35 handle now on WTI, $35.10. After earnings, Dell Technologies surging 8.9% today. It reported quarterly revenue and profit that came in better than projected. Salesforce.com trimming its annual revenue and profit forecast. Salesforce shares, ticker CRM, down 3.5%. Also this morning, we did hear from Big Lots, the closeout store. Big Lot shares up 5.6%. Occidental Petroleum slashing its dividend down from 11 cents to 1 penny a share. Occidental lower today by 5.1%. Again, recapping, S&P ending the week and the day higher, up 14. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Wild thing, think you move me.
I got a few moves I know you'll like.
Automatizamos. Shaken, not stirred.
Just move on up toward your destination.
I can make things move without touching them.
Shaking all over.
Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and Shakers with Carol Messer and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, time for us to dig a little bit deeper into the equity trade. Of course, Charlie giving you those closing numbers. So here's big picture. S&P 500, kind of a split, 243 names in the index. Higher today, 262 lower. Your outperformers among those 11 major industry groups. Information technology up 1.4%. Healthcare, a similar gain. Utilities were up almost 1%. Bottom of the pack, those are your outperformers. Bottom of the pack, real estate and financials. Financials were down about 1%. But Jason, I took a look. I wanted to do some big picture here. So year to date, S&P is still down about 5.6%. Dow is still down 11%. Nasdaq is up almost 6% for the year. From the low, you've got both the S&P up 36% from that March 23rd low. Nasdaq is up 38% from that March low. And then from the high, which was about mid-February, February 19th on the S&P, we're still down about 10%. And then on the Dow and the Nasdaq from those February highs, we're down about 14% on the Dow, and we're down about 3% on the Nasdaq. So just a little perspective that we've had quite a dramatic bounce back. We're still not up at those high levels, but we're not far from it. Certainly not when you look at something like the Nasdaq,
which is remarkable. I mean, I still think much will be written and talked about over the coming weeks, months, and probably years about the growing disconnect it feels like sometimes between the real economy and the market, for sure. Let's talk about a few names that caught our attention in the trade today. One, because it's kind of fun to talk about.
Yeah.
Cody, I think you understand maybe what was driving the stock today. Kylie Jenner, not a billionaire.
I got to tell you, this story, man, we've been passing around. Thank you, Charlie Vollmer, who runs our technical operations here at Bloomberg Radio. And he sent around this story. It was in Forbes, and it says she's no longer a billionaire. And we know she sold, what was it, earlier this year, she sold half of her cosmetics company to Cody.
To Cody, right.
Right?
And the issue apparently that's catching investors, just to tie a bow on it, is that this Forbes article in part pointed out that Cody probably paid a lot, and maybe more than they should have for that stake in Kylie Jenner. So it's a volatile stock. We've talked about it a number of times here. Another poor performer is Nordstrom, JWN. They reported earnings in that stock, disappointing investors, or those numbers disappointing investors, and investors selling off. That was down about 11%.
Right, we got that after the close yesterday. As we did Costco, we just talked about Costco with Barry James, and we did see a little bit of disappointment over some of the results there. That stock was down just a hair. I mean, at its lows was down about 2%, but, kind of following the overall market volatility that we saw on this Friday, ending the day just down about 1/3 of 1% at 308.47. And the stock, it's up almost 5% so far here in 2020. And as Barry said, they certainly look well positioned, going forward, certainly when it comes to the retail environment and embracing more of the digital. And everything that we have heard from so many of our conversations, that if you did not have a digital strategy before the virus, you probably do now, and you should have by now, because more people will be doing things digitally.
One of my favorite trades today was the pizza trade. Domino's Pizza and Papa John's both up. That is because North Coast, an analyst there named Jim Sanderson, he said, quote, "Going forward, we believe consumers will remain wary of dine-in options, which will pressure independent pizzerias, which depend on an average of 1/3 of sales from dine-in traffic. So order in. Domino's Pizza delivers." There you go.
It's pizza night today here at the Mass Restaurant. Although we might be making homemade ones. I'm waiting to hear if they're making dough downstairs.
We made some nice dough yesterday. Actually, Henry did the whole thing, soup to nuts. Really good. Mellow mushroom, for those listening in the southeast, we make the mellow mushroom dough. It is so
What is
good.
that?
It's got molasses in it. Mellow mushroom is this amazing chain down in the south. You should check it out. You would love it.
Okay,
Okay, let's look at the VIX.
I like my crust nice and thin with a little bit of coal on it.
Oh, then maybe
Those coal
it's
ovens.
not so much. Yeah, okay. So fussy. Anyway, did I say that out loud? Oop. All right, the VIX down about 4.5%, closing at 27.30. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Dave, you're up.
Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, what are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for a price on Wilson.
Open up the doors, Dave! Who? Dave! Hey, Mr. Wilson!
Hey, Mr. Wilson. Dave Wilson back with his stock of the day. Very familiar name for many. Williams-Sonoma. Ticker is WSM, and we saw some big moves here today.
Absolutely. It's the place to go if you're willing to spend $100 for the Crusette Skinny Grill featured on its website, or maybe $600 for an espresso machine on sale. And if housewares aren't your speed, maybe the home furnishings at Pottery Barn or West Elm will catch your eye. Williams-Sonoma owns both retailers along with its namesake chain. Williams-Sonoma, the company, was founded in 1956 and went public in 1983. The ticker is WSM. As you mentioned, Carol, the company shares peaked a record in August 2015. This year, they tumbled as much as 60% in a 2-month stretch. Now, Williams-Sonoma has rallied since then. Today, it reached the highest price since August 2015 as fiscal first quarter results went over well. Company-wide sales rose 2.6%. Locations opened more than a year. Analysts expected a drop of 11.4% on average, according to a consensus metrics survey. And revenue and profit were well above the average estimates in a Bloomberg survey. Williams-Sonoma's results showed consumers who had to stay home because of the coronavirus were willing to spend. Hey, they sent the shares to a gain of almost 14%.
Yeah, that's a big bump, man.
It is. All these stay-at-home chefs, I guess you could say.
I'm looking at
upgrade the kitchens.
Yeah, well, right.
And maybe a few other rooms while they're at it.
That's right, tapping into the other
Yeah, you guys are making your own pizza. Boom. Master household.
I know. Boom.
You guys have some Le Creuset. I guarantee it. You do.
Not saying anything.
Yeah, you do.
Anyway.
You will neither confirm nor deny the presence of Le Creuset. We have a lot of Le Creuset. It's great for baking and cooking. I'm just going to say it. All right, Dave Wilson, thank you so much. Have an awesome weekend. Let's get to Bob Moon now. He's got World National. Say Bob.
Jason Jason, they call that dead air. Anyway, with lightning speed, prosecutors in Minnesota have announced charges against a fired Minneapolis police officer accused of kneeling on the neck of George Floyd at length during his arrest. It happened on Monday night, and Hennepin County Attorney Michael Freeman says Derek Chauvin was charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter inside of 4 days.
The horrible, horrific, terrible thing we've all seen over and over again. We have the officer's body-worn camera. We have statements from some witnesses. We have a preliminary report from the medical examiner. We have discussions with an expert.
President Trump's tweeted warning amid unrest in Minneapolis that when the looting starts, the shooting starts, echoes the language of a Miami police chief in 1967 who made clear his distaste for civil rights activists and his belief that violent protests should be met with deadly force. Well, now Trump is claiming he was tweeting against looting that he says brings violence after Twitter obscured his initial tweet and tagged it with a violation of its terms. President Trump intensified his confrontation with China, vowing to punish the country for the coronavirus pandemic and steps to curb Hong Kong's autonomy by ending the territory's special trade status with the U.S. and denying visas to Chinese officials. He cited a litany of grievances against the company. Global news, 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Bob Moon.
Can I just say, I love boom and bust cycles. You just never know where they're going to kind of pop up sometimes.
Yeah, and this is a story, it's among our most read. Romy Varghese wrote it. San Francisco, it is a boom and bust town. We know that to be true, although I have to say this is one of those places, you and I have both spent a lot of time there, and it's one of those places, it's a marvelous, fantastic, amazing place, but there was a sense, I think, in the last 6 months to a year of, everything's just like straight up in many ways, and all these unicorns are going public, and there's such a crunch on real estate. You know, you think it's tight here in the tri-state area. It's even crazier in San Francisco. And now the worm has turned, to say the least.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I feel like, you know, the housing situation and the cost of it has been something we've been talking about for years there. And what's interesting is because of the virus, you're having companies like Twitter say, you know what, our workers, they don't have to come back to the office ever.
Right.
It's not just a case until after the virus is over. And so we have been having these conversations that, you know, workers then are saying, well, wait a minute, then I can kind of live anywhere and I don't have to live in San Francisco where it's really expensive. I might not have a lot of space. And so you think about this could be a very dramatic change. And the thing about that is there's more companies like that where probably a lot of workers can work from home, right? So that you might have them leaving an exodus of San Francisco.
So here's a stat in this story that is pretty astounding, and I would not have predicted this. About 40% of jobs depend on traditional office-using industries in the Bay Area. That's double that of the U.S. average. That's really interesting. Given there's so many technology firms, basically meaning that 40% of the jobs there, you know, you got to go to an office.
Oh, that is interesting.
I would that is counterintuitive for me.
Yeah, I would think it would be the other way around.
Me too.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, so San Francisco, man, it might be another part of the cycle, the boom bust cycle. So we'll keep an eye on that one.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Second monthly advance for the U.S. stock market. It was an up week with the S&P climbing 3%. The Dow by comparison this week up 3.7%. Nasdaq on the week up by 1.8%. Today we had the S&P pick up 14 points, higher by 0.5%. The Dow fell 17, dropping 0.1%. Nasdaq up 120 points today. That was a gain of 1.3%. 10-year up 12.30 seconds with a yield of 0.64%. Gold up 0.8%, 17.32 the ounce.